We are about to start live streaming the meeting, so we are ready to go.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the July 28th, 2021 meeting of the Oregon Early Learning Council. Appreciate council members being here, as well as many agency staff people and the public and whoever else is joining us today. Remy, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Angie Blackwell.
Here.
Katie Brooks will be joining us in just a second. Peter Buckley.
Here.
Ann Kubich.
Here.
George Mendoza.
I'm here.
Dr. Peg Miller.
Here.
Kali Thor Ladd.
Here.
Sue Miller, Chair.
Here.
And then we have Kate Wilcox, who is in lieu of Pat Allen, the Director of the Oregon Health Authority, who is excused. I believe she will be logging in just a minute. We have Colt Gill, the Director of the Department of Education.
I'm here, thanks.
Margaret Salazar, the Director of Oregon Housing and Community Services, who will also be logging in. Liesl Wendt, the Deputy Director of Oregon Department of Human Services.
And we see her name on our screen, so I'm sure she's here. Hi, Liesl.
And then we have Alyssa Chatterjee, the Acting Early Learning Systems Director, who is excused. And in lieu of Alyssa, we have David Mandel, the Director of Policy and Research for the Early Learning Division.
Welcome, David. Thanks for being here. All right. Thanks, Remy.
No problem.
We're going to begin by asking Angie Blackwell if she would talk with us about one of the essential understandings of Native Americans in Oregon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chair Miller, for inviting me to do this introduction. So, as Sue mentioned, my name is Angie Blackwell, and I am a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. I'm descended from the Umpqua and Rogue River bands that were relocated to Grand Ronde in the 1850s. And so today we're going to take a closer look at essential understanding number 8, which is treaties, a very vast topic. And I hope I could share a few things with you today that you didn't already know, as to not bore you to pieces. So the framers of the U.S. Constitution placed treaties right up there with the Constitution itself as the supreme law of the land. And the U.S. holds treaties with many nations throughout the world, and some of those nations are right here within the U.S. borders, and those are the treaties that were negotiated with Indian tribes. Not all Indian tribes agreed to sign a treaty, and those that did so under duress. They were negotiated because tribes were going to just try to get the best deal they can get because the handwriting was on the wall, right? So, what I wanted to share is that within those treaties, tribes reserved rights for themselves. And one of those is the right to govern themselves, which is why tribal reservations are self-governed by the tribes themselves. Many of them reserved rights to continue fishing and hunting and gathering off the reservation within their customary homelands. Many of those rights have been disputed very, very heavily so on the Columbia River with mostly Washington tribes in the 70s. You might remember a lot of Supreme Court cases there around that right. Another thing I like to tell people about treaties is to remind them that within the treaty, the tribe reserved a plot of land for themselves, which is where we come up with the term reservation. So a reservation is not land that the government gave to tribes. A reservation is land that the tribe reserved for themselves. Now, this reservation is not necessarily always within the tribe's original homelands either. because that too was part of the negotiations, and the U.S. government wasn't about to give up prime land, so they were willing to negotiate, for land that wasn't so prime. And so tribes were moved far away in many cases from their original homelands to these reservations. I mentioned at the beginning of this introduction, my ancestors came from Rogue River area from Southern Oregon. So clearly not the original homelands of the people that I descended from. I'm going to refer to my notes so I make sure not to forget anything that I wanted to share. Yes, so the treaties also promised, in exchange for the millions and millions and millions of acres of lands that tribes ceded to the government, they were promised things in exchange. And two of those things which were always very important in our tribe's fight for restoration, and I'm sure for all tribes, were health and education services, which were to last in perpetuity. So there was no time cap on, okay, we'll do this for 100 years, but those education and healthcare services were to last in perpetuity, which is why we have the Bureau of Indian Education, for example, or the Indian Health Service, because those are trust responsibilities of the federal government. So I would just encourage you all, if you would like to know more about the treaties, that you could check out the Oregon Historical Society's Oregon Encyclopedia. And you could also visit the website of the tribes in your area. They all have a cultural or history section on their websites. Many of them share information about their treaties and their history with the federal government. So I just encourage you to do that. And again, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share this information.
Thank you, Angie, very much. As always, you just give us a great perspective on the history of this land, which is a shared history, obviously. And we certainly do acknowledge the continued sovereignty of the federally recognized tribes in Oregon, and look forward to working more closely with the tribes in the future, especially as we specifically set up an early learning tribal hub, which you will be a critical part of. So thank you, Angie. We appreciate you a lot.
You're welcome.
I've asked Kali if she would just give us a quick update on her professional life, since she's just announced a pretty significant change, and I want to make sure we're all aware of it. So welcome, Kali, and congratulations on your new appointment.
Thank you. So I accepted a position of CEO of the Children's Institute, which I'm very excited about. It's a big deal to leave Kairos because as one of the co-founders, it's been, a lot of heart and time, and I don't know, it's very much connected to me, but it's in very good hands with my co-founders. I think this is really an exciting time for early childhood in Oregon. And so I know that the Children's Institute was looking to go to the next level as an organization and really lift up the work of children in this state. And I think given all of the changes that we've been working on as the council and the department to really provide more funding and structure for early childhood, I'm excited to be able to partner and really, I want to do more to share story. I feel like what's been helpful being on the council is hearing all around the state what is happening in early learning. And I think Children's Institute as a statewide entity can really bring more visibility to some of what I think is really promising practices that we see and needs that we have and ways to support families. And I think the council has taught me how it does look different in the rural areas versus our urban areas versus our frontier areas. And so I'm excited. It'll be a steep learning curve in a lot of ways. So I look to all of you as people I can count on to sit down with and talk about things with. because I want to, Children's Institute, I think, serves the state and it serves children. And so I'm working on behalf of that service, and I want to do a good job to be able to illuminate what I think is strong in Oregon, and also hopefully bring more resource to support what's going well and what people are doing. So that is, that's all I could say there. Stay tuned. And I don't transition until September. So these 5 weeks are very intense as I try to take almost a decade's worth of work and hand it over to my
Right.
colleagues.
I'm sure that is not easy to do. I've actually done that transition myself. So I understand it's a challenging time, but congratulations again, Cully. That's quite an honor. I know they did a national search, so congratulations.
And Kali, I just want to add, as I think I was the third employee of the Children's Institute, really excited to see you at the helm of the Children's Institute. So just really wanted to extend my congratulations.
Yep. All right. So as we're congratulating people, I think we should congratulate everybody on this call, plus hundreds of other people, for the passage of our top priority bill in the legislative session, House Bill 3073. Right, Katie? Yay. And you certainly had a big role in it because you have some key legislators. So as you all know, this was our top priority, and it is going to be the impetus for setting up an independent DELC, Department of Early Learning and Care. We're all getting used to this new acronym. And so we've asked the three key agencies who are going to partner to put DELC together, if they would make some comments about where they see this going, and especially from their own agency's perspective. So obviously it's Colt with the education, Lisa with ODHS, and then David will be providing the input for the ELD because Alyssa's out this week. So Colt, if you would kick this off, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Sue. And happy to be here this morning and talk about this and other legislation. We're really excited about House Bill 3073, really around several parts of it. It's a pretty extensive bill. If you haven't had the opportunity to read it, I'm sure you have as council members. It is worth looking across because there's so many parts to it. But at the Department of Education, a couple of parts that really stand out for us in the partnership with ELD and the council are that it provides an opportunity for us to coordinate education and support for our youngest learners. Clearly, that's what it's all about, along with care, which at the department we're less involved in, but the division certainly is. It also clarifies quite a bit of the interaction and coordination between the Early Learning Council and the State Board of Education. And there have been, as you all are aware, over the last several years since the council's development, these areas of, is that a rule that the state board is supposed to create? Is that a rule that the council is supposed to create? How do we bring them together? This clarifies some of that and sets that apart. And also talks about some areas where the council and the State Board of Education work together. So I'm really excited to work towards that and bring the groups together around some of the key efforts that we all share, like social emotional standards, for example, across early learning and into early instruction in our K-12 system. I also think it will help us think really deeply and coordinate with partners around how best to go about providing services to our children who experience disability and their families. So we'll look carefully at all the EI, ECSE programming and where that should sit across these agencies as they develop, and how best to coordinate those programs so they continue to be highly coordinated between the early learning systems and the K-12 system, but also so that we can coordinate services across a variety of systems in Oregon to serve those children and families. And then a couple more. There is a entire section on the SIC, which everybody may not be aware of. This is the State Interagency Coordinating Council. So this is a council specifically designed to think about services related to children who experience disability in Oregon. And so that changes the representation on the council. It brings in more family of children who experience disability. It also really clarifies the information that the council develops and who they coordinate with across the Early Learning Council, the Early Learning Systems Director, as well as continued direction and support and reporting to ODE and the person in my role and the State Board of Education. So I think that will be some new work for them to take on, and a lot more clarification of how we all interact with that group. So that's good. And then ultimately, it sets forward this process for how all of these agencies come together and work with stakeholders to think about the best ways to set up the Department of Early Learning and Care. And I think that's what we'll all be focused on over the next several months to ensure that this new department, this new agency in Oregon is set up for success with all its various components. So I'll stop there and pass it on to others, and happy to jump back in and answer questions or clarify. Or David, if you think I left anything out that you think I should be sharing, feel free to call that out when you share.
Awesome. Colt, thank you. You certainly gave us a sense of the scope. I mean, this is a huge bill, to say the least. David, do you want to talk about the Early Learning Division piece of this? You're muted.
And I was about to say, probably the first thing I should do is take myself off of mute.
Okay.
I also just want to begin. Alyssa made me promise that I would also begin by her apologizing for not being here, although she really has no reason to apologize because she so deserves vacation. She so wanted to be here that she threatened to phone in for this conversation, and we told her that was not going to be allowed. But just did really want to, on Alyssa's behalf, just share how much she wanted to be part of this conversation today. In a little bit, Troy and I will have a chance to talk about some of the other legislation that's impacting the ELD. But again, I think because this has such a sort of cross-agency ramifications, we really wanted to start, with this bill outside of the sort of agency by agency legislative updates. I did also want to note that when the council meets next on August 11th, and Alyssa will be back, and actually I will be on vacation for that council meeting. There will be time carved out in that meeting to really start to talk about what's the work to make all of this reality. So I think Alyssa will share with you with some of the beginning plans of what that looks like, of how we need to engage stakeholders, and particularly families and providers in that conversation. And also some of the plans to work with consultants to really make sure that we are looking at all of the hard questions that need to be figured out in this process. Because I know there's actually going to be so much time in August to really dive into that. What I really wanted to do with my portion of the time today is to take an opportunity to also thank Colt and Liesl and so many colleagues across ODHS and ODE for, I know, the hard work that's already happened, in the process of developing the bill and trying to answer some of those questions. And I know that the hard work that's will also need to take place, in the next 2 years to make all of this a reality. There's lots of really thorny, complicated, weedy, detailed questions that really do impact the ability for this transition to be successful. And we've really had great help and great thought partners from ODHS in ODE and starting to map out some of that work. I think in a couple of weeks, we should have a report from consultants that ODHS hired to help map that out. And I think you'll see how dense and complicated some of this work is. So really just appreciate all the thought that's gone into that. But I also want to also appreciate, both Colt and Liesl, and again, all the colleagues who have been involved in this, have also, in addition to really helping map out all those really important on the ground issues that need to be worked out, but also putting on the table that this is really an opportunity for us to rethink how we serve children and families and work with providers, and how do we really make this an opportunity to make sure that we're serving children and families better. And and in the end, that's the only reason to do these kinds of this kind of work, is with that ultimate goal. So I just also really want to extend, also on behalf of Alyssa, just deep gratitude to all the partners who have been involved in this work already, and I know will continue to be involved as really thoughtful partners as we move forward.
I think you're muted, Sue.
Thank you, David. And we want to add our thanks to yours and Alyssa's for our partners in this. This is it's a big lift, but we're all excited to be a part of it. Liesl, we'd love to hear from you and ODHS.
Certainly. Good afternoon. I think just to piggyback or pick up where David left off, I think the opportunity is, in state agency land, we make policies from different perspectives. So, whether it's from a parent or a family or a child. And I think the opportunity here is to think about the whole family and what does the family need. And so that's, I think, what I'm most excited about with this bill. I think there's opportunity to improve access for parents right now. ELD sets policy, we implement. That's a little clunky from state agency to state agency, even at our best collaborative stage. So I think having the policy and the operations in one shop will be really beneficial, and having that lens on the parent experience. I tried to navigate ERDC for a colleague of mine, and it's clunky. Call here for this, call there for that, call this agency for this, call that agency for that. And one of the things I've said to our folks is, how can we make it so that finding childcare doesn't require you to take 2 days off of work, or 4 hours off of work, right? And that's a challenge for all of us, right? As we design this, we've been constrained by policy or our own bureaucracies, our own funding sources. And I think with significant investment from the legislature and from the federal government, this really is an opportunity to think about, what does this look like for the family and the childcare provider, and let's make it work for them, and let the bureaucracy catch up to the family and the childcare providers, so to speak. So I think that's it's a big lift, but it's a great opportunity, and I think we're all up for the challenge. Affordability is certainly a big piece of this. That, again, I think we're in exciting times with some federal investment that's unprecedented. The biggest challenge, I think, for state agencies right now is how fast can we spend money, which is something we're just notoriously not that good at, by the way. So, but that's a good problem to have. We'll take it over budget cuts any day. And then, I think, as you all know, or maybe I'll just reemphasize, the employment-related daycare program will move. That's a piece of this bill. And so we've hired A&M, Alvarez and Marcel, an international consulting company that we had worked with before as an agency, to really help map out what is with the program right now, so that we're all operating with the same information, and then to give some thoughtful transition considerations for, everything from IT to budget to HR, and I could go on and on. As David said, there's a lot of details to sort out in the next less than 24 months now, but I think there'll be a huge help, and I believe we're trying to arrange for them to come to the August Early Learning Council meeting and present to you what they found and some initial findings from that report. And then ELD intends to hire them to continue, and we intend to hire them to continue to help us with the transition as well. So there'll be some through lines between the agencies on the transition. So thank you.
Wow, thank you, Liesl. Oh my gosh. And Council, just to draw your attention to the handout that was in our packet, which is sort of an overview of House Bill 3073. And as you know, by looking at that, the timeline is included as a part of that document. And we will be talking at our August meeting in more detail about where the council fits into this very aggressive, ambitious timeline. And what will our role be, as Cole pointed out, beginning to work more closely with the State Board of Education, and lots of opportunities here. And it's going to be a very busy and exciting year ahead of us, but we have great partners, so I'm sure it's going to work.
So could I ask just one question of Liesl? In this transition of ERDC, since so many of the families who use that are TANF families, and TANF is still staying with you, how are you thinking about ensuring that those families don't get disrupted in this process or still get the high priority?
It's a great question, Anne, and there was actually language added in one of the amendments to the bill that would prioritize TANF families, making that transition from TANF to employment. So I think there's been some recognition of that, and then it comes up every week in our conversations. So we're definitely watching out to make sure that that's as seamless to the parents and families as possible.
And I just want to add that, that's something that we're also really deeply committed to, making a high priority, that there's, a commitment to really prioritizing TANF families and that they have a seamless experience in accessing care.
That's great. I had a feeling you all were probably on top of that. Just wanted to ask. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. And I'm assuming that the one eligibility is going to play some role in that as this rolls out. So we'll probably hear more about that in August as well. Yes, Kali.
I just want to comment as I'm listening. We were talking about sort of the rudimentary things as it relates to this policy passing, but this is a big deal. And I'm so excited because rarely do we get a chance to build something from the ground up that can serve children in this way and create this seamless system centered on families. I'm just struck by, like, in this conversation, what a huge deal this is and how exciting it is for Oregon. So I just want to say that. And I'm so grateful for the leadership of every agency that is putting their best thoughts and people to make this happen, because I think it is kind of groundbreaking. And I'm just really excited about it.
Yes, thank you, Kali. I think we all share that, and some of us didn't think we'd live long enough to see this day. So it's really super exciting. And, they've mentioned that stakeholder engagement is going to be a key part of this process. And I'm sure the council will end up with a role in that kind of outreach as well. So thank you. Thanks. Okay, so there were a few other bills that passed in the legislature this session. 3073 wasn't the only one. So we've asked our agency partners if they would give us just a quick summary, hopefully focused on the populations we're focused on, and give us the highlights from or lowlights from their perspective of what happened and didn't happen. We're moving the order of these updates around from what's printed in the agenda because of schedule conflicts. So Liesl is going to start because she's already late for a 1 o'clock meeting.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate the flexibility.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. And I think someone's going to pull up a slide deck, but there we go. I'll get started. So, I'll have to be honest, when we were building our agency request budget a year-ish ago, we were really in a deficit mindset and slightly terrified about potential budget cuts to services. And happily, we're not in that place, but it's been a bit of a roller coaster in terms of funding for the last 12 months, and pleased at where we landed. So what I wanted to first talk about is we adopted an equity North Star. So next slide, please. About a year ago, and really the intention was to be crystal clear about our alignment and focus as an agency. And so you'll see the pieces in the orange and blue on the right hand side. But what we wanted to do with the North Star is be clear about why we care about equity. As a reminder, we have about 10,000 staff around the state, and so we didn't want to make any assumptions that everyone understood that, and really messaging that to our staff in all corners of the state. And help us understand where we wanted to be. What would our end state look like? We wanted to inspire and motivate action. I'll channel Fairboards. He said really clearly about the Equity North Star. This isn't words, this is action. And so that's clear in all of our meetings and all of our direction as an agency. And fortunately, our budget reflects some of those desires that we have here. So next slide. One of the large investments that was in the governor's budget and that was funded is an equity policy option package. So this is about $5.6 million. And this will do a number of things. One, we have a very small equity team, so it will increase our staff. I think, as I've mentioned to you before, we are looking at changing our name. We added the O to differentiate ourselves from the Department of Homeland Security. That's been a barrier for people to access us or feel safe in our buildings. And so this package has dollars to invest in community partners to have them give us feedback about how they would like to see our name and how they'd like to feel more included in who we are in our image as an agency. Similarly, the electronic benefits card, which is what SNAP, TANF, other benefits are on, looks like a credit card, has an image of, it's called the Oregon Trail card, has an image of a covered wagon, certainly does not feel inclusive or a recognition of our state's history. And so we'll be rebranding that card as well. And then we've really needed greater language access in all of our programs, but particularly our Office of Developmental Disability Services. Their funding source is primarily federal dollars, and there's just not a lot of flexibility to how to use those. So we'll literally be redoing all of the forms and all of our policy guidance into additional languages. So super excited about that package. In addition, in child welfare, we'll be creating the Child Welfare Equity Advisory Committee. This is in alignment with the governor's Foster Care Advisory Commission, and we'll be addressing inequities and helping advise the department. You'll hear more from Rebecca, I think, later in the program. So she certainly will talk about the work that she's leading in child welfare, and she's definitely changed the conversation there dramatically over the last year or so. Another exciting investment is it's called the Survivor Investment Partnership, and this has been an ongoing partnership with community-based organizations in the governor's office. And the idea is to get dollars in the hands of primarily culturally specific and responsive organizations to support survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and with a particular focus on our tribal communities. So we have some staff that are in this package to help design the program, and really the intention is to get the dollars out into the community as quickly as we can, so communities can serve their folks in the way that they know best. So look forward to that. Next slide. A couple things I think we've talked about in this group before is the crib bumper ban. I think OHA has worked on this, so Kate might hit on this as well. But this is reinforcing the message to place infants on a safe sleep surface. Because I've shared before, when we've done reviews of deaths, which is part of our work and really challenging part of our work, many of the deaths of young children have to do with the lack of safe sleep, as well as drugs and alcohol. So we've really tried to say, what can we learn from those experiences and address some policy changes to prevent those deaths in the future. Next slide. I know we haven't talked a lot about developmental disability services in this group, and we probably should do more of that, but two huge investments in DD services in Oregon. One is the implementation of a new rate model, which we could talk about for a long time, but I won't, that essentially starts to get our direct service professional wages up closer to $15 an hour. And then a second piece is additional funds to actually support the new rate model. And eventually we'll get the staff that are doing that work directly with individuals to just over $15 an hour. So this is a big lift for our community that is benefits from ODDS services, and suffice to say, folks are pretty excited about this. And then on the bureaucratic end, it's going to be a pretty complicated lift to make it happen, but we're on our way there. And I should just make a note, I think others may have seen this as well. Certainly I know OHA, but recruiting and maintaining staff during COVID has been a huge challenge and has been particularly challenging for the Office of Developmental Disabilities. We've had folks that we've had to, particularly foster youth, be in hotels because we have beds available, but we don't have trained staff available to serve them in the really more appropriate setting. And so this helps us address that challenge and being able to recruit and retain talented staff. So kind of looping back to House Bill 3073, two pieces that I just thought would be useful to share here. One of the things that we've identified through the course of the last 6 months or so is, and this gets to Ann's question, is to do a deep dive on data for the families that we're currently serving on TANF and understand, who are the children in those families and what types of early childhood development and childcare would those families benefit from. So we are working on that this fall, and we'll certainly be sharing that with our partners, but just wanted you to know that's kind of been an outgrowth for us to do some of our own internal homework, if you will. And then secondly, the desire to, similar to what you heard from others, really engage families, advocates, and communities. We've learned through the work with A&M, we think we know things or we think we heard this, but I think really being intentional about engaging community, particularly communities of color, to hear how are services working, how are they not working, how would you like them to work? And so we'll be embarking on an effort to hear directly from the people that we're serving or that we would like to be serving better. So more to come on those two fronts. And then the last year, let's just say, has been a little crazy. We had about 2 people dedicated to emergency management a year ago. We now have 29 and probably could double that and still not have enough. So we've played a significant role both in COVID with our sister agency, OHA, and then certainly in last year's wildfire. We're housing roughly just under 1,000 folks now a night and providing meals for them. And we're now doing that in addition for 2021 wildfire survivors, working with our partners over at OHCS to look for kind of those interim and longer term housing solutions. But as you all know, housing in Oregon is very difficult to find, especially in some of these hard hit communities. So we're building our capacity and looking to partner with our other state agencies to be sure. This is all kind of new territory for all of us. I think we would safely say everyone was underfunded, and recognizing that there's really not a roadmap for how to respond to COVID, wildfires, weather events, et cetera, and that we'll all have to kind of stretch ourselves to figure out how we serve Oregonians in their most vulnerable moments. So just not really tied to this conversation, but just wanted to share that's been a growth area for us as an agency over the last year or so. And I think that, there we go. I think that's the last slide. So happy to take any.
And Liesl, and I know we need to move on because Margaret also has a conflict. I'm just wondering, do you have the demographic breakdown of those 1,000 people you're housing every night? Yeah. If maybe you could share that with us at some point. I think we'd be interested in, yeah.
It's been tricky to come up with data for lots of reasons that I'm happy to share, but we certainly could share an update for you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Liesl.
So can I ask a really quick yes or no question of Liesl?
Yes.
Liesl, the caregivers that talk about with the disability services, they're getting their pay rate raised, which is great. Do they also receive healthcare benefits?
Peter, I'm going to ask Lilia to give you the answer to that question because I don't want to answer it incorrectly. So let me follow up with you if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great question, Peter. Okay, we're going to move on to Margaret, who's got a conflict also. Liesl, thank you very much for being with us and for the information. And Margaret, welcome. Congratulations on quite a legislative session.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to see all of you. And I sent some information in advance. I'm not going to share my screen, and I'm just going to kind of chat with you a little bit, but you have some background materials to refer to. This was another incredible legislative session as relates to housing issues. Just to give you a little context, in 2017, we had a historic package of $150 million. In 2019, it was $330 million. In 2021, it's almost $900 million. So it is an incredible, frankly, astonishing housing package. So if you see us and we look a little tired, just bear with us. But let me just broadly talk through what's in the package, and then I'll mention a few areas that I think would be of great interest of this council. So about half of those dollars are for housing supply. So this is continuing to build affordable rental housing, and importantly, this time, also dollars for home ownership development. So for sale affordable home ownership housing, which is great. Advocates have been asking for that for quite some time. And there's also dollars for things like down payment assistance and other kinds of things around the edges of those development resources. We also received a $150 million package for wildfire housing recovery. So some of this is what Lisa was saying around intermediate housing and housing navigation for folks that are not permanently housed. But it's also just the rebuilding sticks and bricks money, land acquisition, and other kinds of housing development resources to build back in those wildfire areas. Those are kind of the big ticket items. A few things that you all would find, I think, of great interest. So one is a youth rental assistance program. So this is really kind of the long-term rental assistance structural issue around youth aging out of foster care or youth experiencing homelessness. So that is a new rental assistance program that we will be standing up. And I think we're still at the very early stages of thinking about that program design. You all may have heard that there is a lot of conversation now around evictions and rental assistance. We are administering $200 million in federal rental assistance. We'll be receiving another $150 million of federal rental assistance on top of that. So that's sort of happening in the background because these are federal dollars. But we could definitely use your help in getting the word out to get folks to apply for those resources. The resources are available now, and I can follow up with detail on how folks can apply, but we definitely could use help in getting the word out for that. We'll be standing up a federal mortgage assistance program in the fall, and this is a $90 million program to help folks be able to pay their mortgages who were hit by the economic impacts of COVID. So important for housing stability for our children and families, no doubt, both the rent and mortgage assistance. I want to thank you and recognize your support for House Bill 2100. This was our huge lift this session. Sue, thank you so much for testifying in support of this. This was a bill, one of our agency bills, which was looking to infuse racial equity into our homeless services system for the state of Oregon, and also in how we provide funding availability for homeless services, opening up those dollars to an array of different service providers, including youth homelessness providers, but also culturally specific and culturally responsive organizations, and building in racial equity expectations into outcome-oriented contracts for the first time in homeless services. So this was a huge modernization effort, and we want to thank you for your support there. All the things we're talking about around getting families with children housed and prioritizing that and running those kinds of campaigns. We cannot do that with the existing structure, which is very fragmented and kind of locally based. It would really allow us to have more of a voice and accountability there. There will be a task force as part of that bill, so the final outcome is not determined, but the idea is that there will be a task force that will come back with recommendations predominantly around the racial equity issues and the funding issues to the legislature in the short session in 2022. And then the final piece I've saved for last, which is we got dollars for the co-location of early learning centers in affordable housing. And it's something that's in the Raise Up Oregon plan. It's something that's been a goal of this group for quite some time. I believe it's $10 million that we received, so it's a significant chunk of change. And the legislature asked us to come back in February with a report on how we plan to deploy those dollars. And we are planning to engage a third-party intermediary to help create that report, partly capacity, but also just to leverage the great work going on out there in the field. Folks like Enterprise Community Partners, the Low Income Investment Fund, there's some other kind of outside entities that have done a lot of work in this area. And we want to make sure that we're not leaving any stones unturned in terms of how we might approach that effort, but definitely we'll be doing that in close coordination with the folks at the Early Learning Division. So that is very, very exciting. So those are just some highlights. There's so much more I could delve into. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Margaret. Yes, what an incredible session. And as I've said before, it's the good news and the challenging news is to have that much money to get out the door. Quick question, you asked for help in letting people know about the rental assistance program. Is that going to be run through community action agencies on a local basis?
Yes, so there's the version of the program that's out now is run through community action agencies. But we have a centralized application portal, which is something new. And so folks just go to, I think it's OregonRentalAssistance.org, but I'll provide the link to you, which is how folks intake their application. And then those are referred by the system to the local administrators.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Khalid.
I just have a question around the affordable housing infrastructure dollars. Is there anything policy, and maybe it's a rulemaking question, but that would require the building of affordable housing that includes families? In the metro region, we have a huge shortage. There's, even with all the affordable housing, very few units actually have room for families. And so I'm curious if there's any sort of policy impetus there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. Thank you so much, Khalid, for asking that. So actually, it's very exciting because the flagship program now is called LIFT, the Local Innovation and Fast Track Housing Program. And we received, I can't recall now, I think it's about $250 million in bond funding for development under LIFT. And LIFT in statute is specifically geared toward families. So that's allowed us, when we put out those dollars through our grant competitions, to give incentives in our scoring for family-sized units. And we've been able to see 2, 3, and even 4-bedroom units come out of those developments. So, but I think that's something where, as we develop the program framework and to roll out these new dollars, we'd be glad to kind of share that with this group to make sure to get your perspective on, is our strategy to meet that goal? Are we hitting the right mark, or are there other things that we could do? I mean, partly in putting out these co-location dollars, it makes me think about whether we could even be more intentional around serving families and then tying it to these new dollars as well.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Kelly. Good question. Any other quick questions of Margaret? Okay, there will be lots to work on together in the coming months, Margaret. Thank you very much and congratulations. Colt, how about if we jump back to you and let you do some more of the great outcomes you had?
Thank you, Sue. Sure. I will drop into the chat our 40-page summary, and I won't go through the 40-page summary. But Remy, perhaps for those that aren't here, you can share out with them. This legislative session was busy for us, like all the other agencies. We tracked around 300 bills that impacted K-12 education, and about 90 of those became law. So we're now in the midst of figuring out the best ways to implement those bills as they move forward. So I'm just going to highlight a few that the agency, with the support of the governor, brought forward to the legislature, and a couple of others related to equity. So we brought forward a bill in partnership with the 9 tribes to ensure that all students who are members of the tribes are free to wear tribal regalia and objects of cultural significance at school events like graduation. It's something that we as an agency have done for several years, is send out a letter to all the superintendents trying to ensure that that was possible, but now we got that as a state law, so that's helpful and exciting for us. We also helped to pass House Bill 2056 that we introduced, which is a linguistic inclusion bill. So what it does is it runs through all of Oregon's statute, and will do the same for the Oregon administrative rules that the state board passed, and replaces the term English or English language arts with language arts, so that it's inclusive of reading, writing, speaking, listening in all languages, including English. And opens up new opportunities for students who clearly have strong language arts skills that may not be solely in English. We also worked in partnership with a couple of legislators on both sides of the aisle, and a student in Oregon and some student groups in Oregon, to pass the Every Student Belongs Act. This is something that the state board took action on first, but happy to see this become a state law. This helps school districts have a set of actions that they can bring forward when there are incidents of bias in schools, and also prohibits the display of symbols of hate, including the noose, the flag of the Confederacy, and the Nazi swastika symbol. It has clear language around each of those symbols, because there are some related symbols that are not hate symbols, and it allows for districts to recognize when other symbols have been displayed as symbols of hate that have disrupted education, and allows them to name additional symbols of hate and prohibit those as well. We also, along with the other education agencies and the Racial Justice Council and their subcommittee on the Education Recovery Committee, worked in partnership to help pass House Bill 2166, which many of the education agencies share some responsibility around. For the K-12 system and for us at ODE, our primary focus within that bill is around developing culturally responsive and appropriate social emotional learning standards. And so we'll want to build on the earlier work of the Early Learning Division and the department when they created the guidelines for early learning in kindergarten that include social emotional guidelines. And so we'll be creating those and working with partners around the state to help do that. We also created the LGBTQ2 SIA+ Student Success Plan and got that funded with some initial dollars. This was a plan that was created by the LGBTQ2 SIA+ community and students in Oregon over the last several months now. And that was recognized by the legislature and brought into law, and will include some funding to ensure that our schools are more welcoming and supportive of all the students we serve, especially those who identify as LGBTQ. Two others that we helped with quite a bit, well, just one other, and then I'll pass it back to you, Sue, and that's Senate Bill 732. This is the Education Equity Advisory Committee. So this is a requirement now for every school district in Oregon to have an Education Equity Advisory Committee. This is something that, along with the Every Student Belongs rule and now act, that the State Board of Education was a champion for, and has the intent of having every school district have this committee that is actually representative of the students, racially and ethnically representative of the students that the district serves, that serves as an advisory committee to each school board in Oregon. And so we'll be working with the state board to create the rules for how districts implement these committees. And I'll stop there. There's plenty more in that 40 pages, and happy to answer questions via email if any of the council members have them.
All right. Thank you, Colt, very much. We appreciate the overview and certainly appreciate the focus on equity that sort of infuses everything that you've just talked about. And as you know, that's a high priority and a focal point for the Early Learning Council. So I'm guessing we will have lots of overlap and good ways to partner in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So thank you. We're going to keep moving on. I see we've got Ben Cannon with us, who is head of our higher education for the state of Oregon. Welcome, Ben. And thank you for being with us. Obviously, higher ed is a critical part of the early learning system, because without teachers and providers, we don't have a system. So we are delighted to have HEC as a part of this conversation. And welcome you, Ben. It's good to see you again.
Likewise. Thanks, Sue. Thanks for having us. And I'm joined by the director of HEC's Office of Workforce Investments, Karen Hummelbaugh, who I'll turn this over to in a moment to focus specifically on some of the new activity and investments that the legislature dedicated to workforce development, which may include and touch on some of the ways in which, as you noted, Sue, our work in higher education and workforce training intersects with support for young children and their families. And I just also at the outset want to express my appreciation, Sue, for this invitation and what I hope is a ever deepening partnership between the HEC and the Early Learning Council and the new Early Learning Agency, whose acronym I have already forgotten, but I know it's going to displace HEC as the state's most notorious new agency acronym. I was fascinated by that discussion, having been part of an agency creation just a few years ago. There it is, DELC.
Oh, good. We'll take some tips from you, Ben.
Alyssa and I will be chatting. So I'll just touch on a couple of big picture higher ed highlights, and then, as I said, turn it over to Karen. I'll start with budgets. Like I think our colleague from DHS noted, this was a sort of head-spinning budget session because we went from what we thought would be austerity to what turned out to be resources we never had really envisioned, at least not in this session. But it was a good news for post-secondary education, workforce training, really all around. I think most notable are some increases to state investment in financial aid, the Oregon Opportunity Grant Program, for example, which is a need-based financial aid program supporting students seeking degrees at public and private colleges and university, will grow to $200 million this biennium, which represents almost a 25% increase to that program, which is significant. And we're excited about serving more students and larger awards through that. But we're also excited about our partnership with the Educator Advancement Council, the EAC, to expand state investment in our educator prep programs and support for underrepresented Oregonians and potential educators of color who are seeking degrees and certificates. So we administer scholarships really in partnership with EAC for prospective teachers of color. And that's a exciting growth, modest but exciting growth to those initiatives. We're also, with that equity lens, we're really pleased that the HEC will expand its diversity, equity, and inclusion staffing from one position, which we were thrilled to get from the 2019 legislature, to 3 positions. So like many state agencies, we're growing our dedicated staffing portfolio to diversity and equity issues. Final point of many, I mean, I could go on and on about budget, of course, it's complicated, but I will also note the investments the legislature chose to make in benefits navigators at each of our public colleges and universities to support students in connecting with the variety of federal and state benefits, not specifically just higher education. Of course, there are some of those, Pell Grants and other financial aid resources, but also housing, human services, food support, and potential childcare support through positions, dedicated positions on campus to support connecting students with those benefits. A lot of policy bills, and we're in the process of putting the finishing touches on our lengthy legislative report, and I'll circulate that, at least send it to staff to consider circulating to all of you in upcoming days. But I'll just mention 2 pieces of legislation that I think could have some relevance to early childhood educators or potential early childhood educators. One of which is a bill, House Bill 25, Senate Bill 233, which gives the HEC the responsibility to establish a common course numbering system for lower division courses at our public colleges and universities. So they will all share eventually, it'll take a few years working with faculty, but they will all share common courses, and those courses will be commonly transferable to and applied towards certificates and degrees at all of our colleges and universities, hopefully helping to heal, if not solve, the longstanding kind of transfer challenge that many students in Oregon, as well as around the country, have faced. The other bill is a bill to create a process, right? We know about those. This is a bill to create a legislative task force, a task force of legislators that will spend the upcoming interim focusing on the success of underrepresented students in post-secondary education. And so their goal, the goal of this yet to be appointed task force of legislators, will be to they'll go around the state here, in particular from underrepresented students in higher education, understand their barriers and what opportunities the state may have through investment or through policy to better support those students in achieving their college workforce goals. So we think that's a big opportunity for the sessions to come. I think for some legislators, this is designed to resemble the Student Success Committee that spent, as you know, several years ago, an interim looking at early childhood and K-12 issues, and developing a package of recommended investments connected with new revenues for state support in early learning and K-12. So that's it on the sort of traditional higher education landscape. But let me ask Karen to share a few words about our efforts around, and the legislature's efforts around, connecting Oregonians, especially young Oregonians, with workforce development and training opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben, and welcome, Karen.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. And I thought I'd start out just briefly telling folks, because I've worked with some of you, but some of you I haven't, but just for those of you who are a little less familiar with what our office does, we have a broad portfolio of responsibilities that you might not normally associate with the HEC. And this includes strategic initiatives at the state and local workforce boards, programming statewide for low-income adults, dislocated workers, and young people. And we administer the AmeriCorps grantees across the state, and we have a newly, I'll talk about in a minute, broad portfolio of youth programming that focuses on both re-engagement and employment for young people, all the way as young as 13. And with that said, I know we haven't had as many conversations with this group as other agencies, but I'm pretty excited about the potential for collaboration with the council's work. And in looking at the Raise Up Oregon report that we were asked to kind of look at, there are a couple of places I wanted to draw attention to where I think we have some really solid places to collaborate. In particular, with Goal 2, number 9, about coordinating comprehensive services and making sure that we have people who are getting off of and reducing participation in the child welfare system. Our ecosystem in the workforce system includes career information, potential training dollars, supportive services that sort of wrap around folks in those workforce centers statewide. And these can complement other resources for families and reduce dependency. Another place I'll talk about in our legislative piece here in a moment is in Goal 3, 10, and 12, really talking about what do we look like for our cross-sector collaboration and our regional systems being strengthened. And then finally, a place that might not seem obvious, but we do a lot with the business and philanthropic communities, and we're starting to do even more with our office. And this relates to number 13, where in addition to the HEC Commission, we have 5 other boards and commissions. They all have business participation on them. And in particular, our state's Workforce and Talent Development Board is very interested in the topic of a continuum of success for families. And they're very interested in addressing any systemic changes or movements that need to happen in our public workforce system so that we can move families up economically. They've produced a couple of reports this last year that relate to this, one on sort of true needed wages for families to be successful, another about essential employability skills. And both of these are really meant to provide clearer pathways to jobs and include talking about those in the care and education economies where we don't normally always focus. So I'm hoping today is just a really good initial conversation for us. I'll speak to a couple of bills in particular that I think are of interest. One is Senate Bill 623, which sounds a little boring, but hopefully will result in some of these things we're talking about. But it's a comprehensive assessment of our public workforce system. This is being done by a third-party vendor, and we're going to have that report by the end of September for the legislature and the governor. And it is meant to identify gaps for our customers and to make policy recommendations to improve those gaps. And this will particularly look at, and we expect some of those gaps will be childcare being available, more training dollars for those wanting to enter in careers, as well as people who are most in need, which obviously includes people who are sort of in the cycle of poverty, or families or kids of color who are disproportionately left behind, and how does our system help them? So we'll look forward to that report, and I'm sure share it with this council as well as others when it comes out. Another bill that came out of this legislative session was House Bill 2092. This is the Oregon Youth Employment Program. This was a bit of a modernization on an old piece of legislation that had never been funded, but it was funded this year. And the funding for this will go towards making sure that young people have work experiences, so summer work experiences, but that those work experiences not only include that employment opportunity, but they also include talking about what can next steps be, what are career opportunities, what are pathways for them to keep continuing forward beyond just their work or high school experience. We also have embedded in our agency budget, and this has always existed, but just want to draw some attention to it, section of general funds that are all about work experiences. Those are for adults and young people, and they can be on-the-job trainings, paid internships, or other things that will give people exposure to careers in different areas that they may not have thought of. And those, we can talk about that later too, but those components include making sure people have career information and pathways into all of these different sectors of our economy. I think those are two of the big ones that we have that kind of directly relate. I also just wanted to add in a couple of places where we're relating to some pieces of work. One is that we're really looking at how we can continue to advocate for increased investment in compensating early childhood educators. We know that pay scales and compensation floors are an issue, and we're talking about if there is potential to work with an apprenticeship model in this area so that we can support the childcare system in that way, where families aren't bearing the cost and also people aren't working at wages that are lower than would sustain their own families. In that vein, we're also working with the Racial Justice Council's subcommittee. I usually get this wrong, but I think it's Economic Development and Workforce Subcommittee. And we're talking to them about what potential strategies and investments we have for workforce. And this has come up in terms of sort of an industry sector approach that may be something that moves forward from that group. I think that's probably a good top level summary of where we are with legislative and just sort of other things that relate to this council's work. But I do just want to reiterate what Ben said too, that the role of our office is a little unique, but our state and local partners are here to help however we can and however we can help our families move forward. So thanks, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Wow, thank you, Karen and Ben. Jeez, there are lots of possibilities here. Katie Brooks is asking, what's the timeline for that skills gap report that you mentioned, Karen?
It's a system gap analysis, and it's September 30th is the initial assessment. The legislation requires us to then do a more comprehensive assessment in all the even numbered years, but we'll have something out hopefully publicly by the beginning of October.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, Peter.
Karen, could you put your email address in the chat just so we can follow up? Some of the things you said were great. And
I'm sorry, I know I talked really quickly and didn't do a PowerPoint. So that's
I'd love to get some follow-up info.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate having you, both of you, Ben and Karen, on this in this meeting. And I think it's, we talk about workforce at every council meeting virtually, because it's a huge, huge capacity issue for us. And we now have money, as many agencies do, to stand up some more programs, more preschool, more, early childhood. But without the staff, we can't stand the programs up. So we are very tied to you all. And as we look at our early learning hubs and the whole childcare resource and referral system that we have, whether there's a way for us to also connect with your state and local partners that you both have mentioned, to just see as we try to develop, not just at the state level, but kind of a regional level approach to early learning, we can really tag into your resources on that level too. So lots of possibilities. Yes, George? You need to go off of mute, George.
Sorry.
Thanks. No problem.
I need practice on this again.
Good to see you.
Just that this topic of workforce development, whether for early learning or K-12 education or higher education, and I'll just say the shortage of folks that want to be educators, whether it's in any of these fields, is something that I think is very compelling for early learning, K-12, as well as higher education, to collaborate, get a study, do a report, figure out what's getting in the way, figure out what strategies or what solutions can be applied so that we can, I'll just say, not have a teacher shortage. I fundamentally feel like one of our worst problems in the next 5 to 10 years will be not having enough educators. And this is like the right people in the right spot to work and collaborate to figure out some solutions for our future. That was my statement or comment.
Yeah, no, thank you, George. And you talk about that at many of our meetings. You're right. You're right. Khalid, did you have a comment or question?
Kind of question or comment, sort of building off of what George said. When I think about home-based providers, they're sort of small business owners running childcare, and you talked about pathways, and I'm wondering, within the early learning space, is there intentionality around exposing young people to pathways that include running a small business that's a childcare business, and what it takes, and what is the training that you need to do, whether you're doing it in a home or a center, really, because there's the teacher issue, and then there's also the administrator level business owner issues. And I feel like there's very little guidance around pathways within early learning. So just wondering if you're looking at all the avenues and all the different jobs that are involving early childhood, and how there are clear pathways to those jobs.
That's a really great point, and I think we do a poor job on that, just to be frank. I do think there are some examples where we're doing better. Clackamas County, the Clackamas Workforce Partnership, I think with early learning in its previous form, and the ESD there had started to talk about how to make that pathway clear, those different options basically to folks, and young people or adults, just people to understand like what it takes to enter into them. But that whole entrepreneurship or having your own business is something we probably do skip over more than we should, and we definitely have the resources to do something differently. So that's probably a good one to put on our future conversations, or something we can one-off with whomever's appropriate at the staff level.
Okay, that would be great, Karen. And I know we would be very interested in any work you're doing around the compensation for early learning providers. You mentioned an apprenticeship model as one option, but we know that one reason people aren't attracted to that as a profession is because of the lack of compensation. And
this is a place where the care economy in like long-term care has some good examples I think we could potentially follow up with, where the businesses were having such amount of turnover that they recognized that the investment in wages and benefits would benefit them more, but the apprenticeship model was the way in which they were able to get there. And so I think we do have some places to look where we might be able to pilot something similar in this arena. And I think there are enough people interested in that, it might be possible at this point in time.
Awesome. We would love to hear about that, and hopefully connect it to some of our, on the grounds or regional resources too. Katie.
There are also some external changes, especially in the home care provider who's starting essentially a small business, that are spreading across the nation, that can also coincide with some of these programs that you're talking about. And it's could be, I guess, categorized as business education and business plan education. And there's just resources out there that didn't used to be for people who want to study this, pursue it as a career, and maybe start it as their own business rather than be a provider in somebody else's. And hopefully we'll be able to integrate the new methodologies that are out there, the new technologies that are out there to help people with that.
Awesome. Great, Katie. Good point. Any other questions of Ben or Karen? If not, we want to thank you both very, very much. It's very exciting to have you join us today. And feel free to stay if you want, but you also may have other things you need to do. So thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah. Let's go to the Oregon Health Authority. I know Kate has been on this call. Hi, Kate. Good to see you again.
Good to see all of you too. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Thank you for being a part of our meeting today. We appreciate all that you do for us.
Oh, well, you're very kind, and I'm really just the pinch hitter here. So I think Remy has my slide deck. It's not very extensive. Just to kind of reiterate what others have said, you know, we started this session in a mindset of deficit and ended drinking out of not just one, but probably 10 fire hoses of funding. And so it's been quite the roller coaster in many, many different ways, be it dealing with the pandemic and then dealing with vaccines and dealing with the legislative session. So there's a lot going on. And so I'm just going to hit on a couple of things. The other thing, just as you all well know, Oregon Health Authority is huge and we have work all over the place. I'm much more anchored in the public health work. And so I'm going to share some of the behavioral health work that I'm not as well anchored. So if there are questions I can't answer, we'll get you the answers for that. So what we're going to do is just talk a little bit about the budget, what we got through the budget, and then some bills. And actually, why don't you go ahead and skip to slide 5. One more. There we go. Okay, so we'll start with the budget pieces. Again, you know, some of the funding that came through public health modernization got $45 million in addition to current service levels. And that brings it close to what was presented in the original assessment for public health modernization. Granted, that's 5 or 10 years old now. But this was a huge and very exciting investment that we can now start to operationalize our state health improvement plan, which really focuses on social determinants of health and decrease the health inequities, specifically for youth and families, but it crosses all early childhood and all families, because the social determinants we know are kind of one of those root causes of challenges that families have of young children experience. We got additional, not the 7.5, the 7.5 includes the federal funds. We got an additional 4.6 in general fund for university offered home visiting, also known as the Family Connects Oregon program. And this comes on top of our current service level of 3.1 million in general fund. So we have about 7.6 in general fund, and we'll use that to leverage federal Medicaid dollars to support the services for the Medicaid family portion of it. So that was very exciting. We'll be able to build out our infrastructure a little bit more. Got a 6.5 million to expand services for children and adolescents who need that kind of mobile response for that crisis intervention for behavioral health experiences. And thank you. And then an additional, whoops, back one, an additional 4.5 for the Advancing the System of Care Advisory Council and their ability to do work in different parts of these grants that they provide, and working more specifically with the tribes. Okay, so let's go on to some bills. So And this is just going to be a smattering of bills. And as we were talking, I've remembered a couple of others, so I'm going to throw in a couple that aren't actually on here. This just gives you a sense of what we were up against, not against, but dealing with. There was just a lot. So House Bill 2077 as the statutory authority for OHA to compel cleanup of lead contaminated sites when it's determined that a property owner has violated the lead-based paint requirements. So this gives more teeth to OHA to be able to do that work, which is really critical. House Bill 2842 provides financial assistance for repair and rehabilitation and health and safety upgrades for residential housing. It's called the Healthy Homes Program, and it's primarily for those who are houses occupied by members of low-income or environmental justice communities. So that's pretty exciting. House Bill 20, next slide, please. House Bill 2261. Really, this is one of the tobacco ones. Tobacco is always a really hard area to get legislation through, not because there isn't political will, but because there are strong tobacco lobbyists that are going against that political will. And so this was a real win to be able to reduce the access and availability of inhalant delivery systems, so known as vaping or e-cigarettes, by removing the online and retail sale mechanism for purchasers in Oregon. So that's really huge, particularly for our youth. There are two other public health bills that I just want to touch on. One, it's kind of funny when they aren't sort of contentious or you aren't in the middle of it, you kind of forget about them. So I did want to do a shout out to Liesl for remembering the crib bumper ban bill, which I should have because it's my partner, Dr. Ben Hoffman, who was approached by Representative Scouten and said, I need to do a bill, what should we do? And he said, oh, let's ban bumpers. And it sailed through. I mean, there was no opposition. There was hardly any, there was like one hearing and it just went through. I was like, gosh, if all bills could be that easy, wouldn't that be awesome? And in other states, actually, that type of bill has come up against a huge amount of opposition from manufacturers. So that was a win. And it went into effect on my 60th birthday. So that was pretty exciting. So another one that I want to share that I thought about later was House Bill 2528. And this is in the oral health arena. This allows for a new level of mid-level oral health provider called the dental health aid therapist. This is something we've been working on in our section around through pilot projects. And we finally got this mid-level provider authorized as an authorized provider, oral health provider in Oregon. And so this is really going to open up a lot of access issues. It's kind of parallel to a nurse practitioner in terms of their autonomy, not quite as much as a nurse practitioner, but they have a broader scope of practice than a dental hygienist and can work a little bit more independently. So currently, one of the pilot projects is operating in our tribal communities. And so I think this is a really great opportunity for our equity work to support communities who have not had access to oral health care. And we know that that's huge and it starts, from birth on. So that's pretty exciting. Okay, next slide. Now we'll move into some of the behavioral health bills. Again, there were like 10 fire hoses of these. So this is just a little smattering. House Bill 3069 is going to improve the infrastructure for the statewide coordinated crisis service system to include a 988 suicide prevention and behavioral health crisis line. So that's really exciting to be able to support those people who are really, really having some crisis time. House Bill 2086 really is looking at the Governor's Behavioral Health Council Advisory Council System Transformation Recommendations. This is exciting because it's really operationalizing the recommendations that were created, and that doesn't always get to happen either. So very exciting here. And it really provides incentives for OHA and payers and providers to engage with people and work to make the behavioral health system function better as a whole. So we hope that that will pan out to some better infrastructure in supporting the behavioral and mental health needs in our state. The next slide, House Bill 2417 requires OHA to administer matching grants to cities and counties to operate mobile crisis intervention teams, which we know are really important for that on-the-ground community support. Senate Bill 563 lowers the age of youth suicide in quotes to age 5 and includes up to age 25. It's really unfortunate that we have to do that, but really fortunate that we are able to provide services to this age group. House Bill 2088 requires OHA to adopt the tribal traditional health workers as an additional category within our traditional health worker legislation. And this is really very exciting in terms of increasing access to care in the tribal partner in the tribal areas of our state. I did want to kind of jump on the bandwagon that George started in terms of asking Ben and Karen for support around how do we increase those who want to provide work in the education arena. I want to add nurses to that because we have a real nursing shortage and we're going to need a lot more nurses going forward. And one of our ideas is how can we use community health workers and traditional health workers and help them get the education that they need to be able to elevate to nursing qualifications and then be able to work in their communities and provide culturally specific and relevant work in nursing. So that's my pitch for our HEC folks. So with that, I'm going to stop and see what you have for me in terms of questions.
Okay, council members, questions of Kate? It's a lot going on in health. Yes, Peg.
If you're speaking, you're on mute. There.
I'd just like to inquire a little bit about if built into that home visiting program, because I'm a big supporter of that. But as kind of a boots on the ground person, find many families that are somehow resistant to that. And if there's some dollars to promote the sort of acceptability and normalcy of home visiting programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I should come back and give an update on that program at some point in time. Yes, what we're implementing as is governed by Senate Bill 526 out of the 2019 legislative session is a universally offered home visiting service for all families of newborns. We're getting it off the ground. We've started services very small in some communities, and we're going to be slowly scaling it out. But it's going to be offered to all families with, so the intent and what the evidence base shows is that when you start to offer it to everyone, it reduces that stigmatization and normalizes the whole concept of it's okay to reach into your community for services and supports when you need them. So yes, we have a whole outreach program on that. We'll be doing lots of communications. We've had to, because of the pandemic, our whole rollout statewide has been delayed by at least a biennium probably. So look for that to be flourishing as we roll over the next 6 to 8 years. So I hope that answered your question.
Awesome. Yeah, good question, Peg, and thanks, Kate. I think having you come back and give us an update on that at a future council meeting would be really helpful.
Great.
We're all very interested in it. And it's obviously so targeted on that newborn to 2 or 3, which we don't talk about enough. So that would be great. We need to move on because we're out of time, but Kate, thank you very, very much. And you did a great job of filling in for your boss.
Nobody can fill in for Pat. He's pretty awesome.
Well, you did a great job, so thank you. And David and Troy, I apologize to you that we are going to hold off on your presentation, legislative presentation, so that we can move on and hear from Rebecca, who is online and ready to talk with us. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome. Long time no see, like 2 days.
2 days, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, Rebecca, as you all know, is the Director of Child Welfare for the state of Oregon. Arrived what, a week or 2 weeks before COVID shut down everything. So she's probably just beginning to explore Oregon a year and a half later.
Yeah, I actually had 4 months
Oh.
I had the winter here, and so I'd go to work when it was dark and I'd come home when it was dark, and I thought I was going to get to actually see Oregon as the spring came around, and the world had different plans. My deputy April started on the day we started to shut down, and so I spent much of my time begging her not to leave. Please don't leave. I promise I didn't do it on purpose.
Well, I'm glad she didn't leave. Good begging. Good begging. So thank you for being with us. We are very excited to get updated on family preservation and whatever you want to tell us and how we can support your work.
Well, thank you, Sue. So everyone, Rebecca Jones Gaston, she, her pronouns. So I've been in my seat now. November is going to be 2 years, which is really hard for me to say because I still have to look things up on a map. I have to use GPS to go anywhere. I'm scrambling whenever folks are, calling out cities. I think I've got the counties down. That's what my goal has been. I've learned our districts and how we organize our offices. And then I think I've got the counties down and a sense of geographically where things are. And now I've got cities because what I'm learning as a new Oregonian is many of our Oregon cities share names with cities in other places. So I've worked through that confusion of that I wasn't going to Milwaukee, Wisconsin if I took a certain road. I was actually going to Milwaukee, Oregon. So all those sort of things. It's been fun, and I will be fully transparent. There's lots of activity happening here at my house. I'm actually tomorrow getting in my truck and pulling a U-Haul trailer with my adult son who has been stuck here with me, and he is finally getting to move to Los Angeles. He came along with me when I came out to Oregon because he's like, well, at least it's the West Coast, and then I'll just move down to LA, and that didn't happen because of the pandemic. He's been stuck here with me, so he's finally getting to go and be amongst peers and not be at home with his mother. So there's a lot of packing, and I have a pandemic puppy. I did all the things that folks have been doing during the pandemic. Took up bread baking, all the things. So I am happy to be here. I have far too many slides. And so I'm going to probably skip through some of them. I'll share my screen and skip through some of them. You'll have them for reference and information. I want to provide some context of what our vision is for child welfare, the family first opportunity, and then really hoping to have some discussion with everyone around ideas and thoughts and possibilities as we're thinking about particularly young children and prevention, and what I think ultimately our hope is that we're building a well-being system that expands our scope as a child welfare agency, or narrows our scope, and it expands the possibilities for other serving systems to meet the needs of kids and families, so that they can stay together safely and be well in their communities. So I won't be able to see faces or chat. Someone will have to tell me if I am entirely talking too fast, or if there's questions along the way. So this is always a test on if I can actually do what I say I'm going to do. All right, can you see the screen?
Yes, looks good.
Perfect, wonderful, thank you. So vision for transformation. I'm hoping that you've had a chance to see it, look at it, reflect on it. Some of you may have even had an opportunity to contribute to the development of it. It's one of the things we're really proud that we were able to continue to push forward, even in the space of a global pandemic, to really create a vision and use it as our touchstone, roadmap, North Star, whatever metaphor we want to plug in there, to really base our decisions on our core values and principles and what we hope that we're working towards for child welfare. And so ultimately here, we want to get into the space where we're talking about supporting families and promoting prevention. And so you'll hear me talk a little bit about Family First and the federal opportunity that's created, but really that is just a narrow slice of talking about prevention. And it's really talking about prevention of coming into foster care, which is important, and we want to do that. But those of us who are serving children and families, we absolutely, I believe, share a desire that we're actually in the business of preventing harm and instability for children and minimizing trauma experiences and those sort of things. And for that to happen, we've actually got to get way ahead of where someone calls a hotline, calls the child abuse hotline. And so the idea really with some of these concentric circles is that, you know, the Family First prevention services is a pretty narrow dot in the middle. And then we've got the broader family preservation, and then the Oregon's prevention system, well-being system is the bigger concentric circle, and where there's lots of opportunities for us to think about collaborations and also pushing our own boundaries or walls that we've constructed around what we think we can or cannot do. And so our vision really is around wanting to prevent abuse, prevent maltreatment, prevent harm, and to really take advantage of all the things that the federal statute actually does allow us to do. And what it does, one of the critical things it does is it allows us to create some opportunity that can draw down some federal dollars to be able to provide services and supports to children and families together at home outside of foster care. Racial equity and justice, absolutely at the core, and equity in general at the core of what we're doing. And our mantra is that it's everyone's job to bring it into our work. It's not a 2-hour training that we require every year. It's not, you know, 2 or 3 folks that sit on a team that it's their job. It's absolutely every one of our job to really work towards creating a system that's anti-racist and a system that is equitable and just in serving our communities as a whole. Really intentional work on collaborating with our tribes in really meaningful ways that in many ways corrects our historic relationship with tribes, certainly as child welfare, of being used as a tool around separating children from families, and collaboration. I said this through my interview process, I'll say it till I can't say anything anymore, is I don't know all things. I don't want to know all things. What I want to know is how to connect with people who can do the things that we're not able to, or even have the answers or strategies and solutions that we haven't thought of yet. And this visual really is just a representation, again, of kind of the Family First prevention plan process, and that plan really is that little small dot, right? It is a narrow scope, and our hope is that we continue over the years to grow and expand what that scope is, both from building out existing relationships and partnerships that we have that serve prevention and support for families and children, but also that space of the prevention of maltreatment, where families might not have even touched the system that I'm in, but we want to actually support and collaborate with those that are helping families not actually get to my door at all. And this is just another representation of that, really just the intersection, that the ideas that we're really trying to build towards the prevention system that we hope to have here in Oregon. And so I'll give a couple of just quick refreshers or reminders if folks don't know what the Federal Family First Prevention Services Act is, and depending on my mood, I might land and say it was a fiscal reform strategy, but which I think it was, but it also was, I think, the push to our systems across the country to be talking about prevention in new and different ways, and set out some expectations that we are absolutely intending to try and serve more and more children outside of our foster care system, which has been our only lever of intervention really for a long, long time. It passed in February 2018. It passed in February 2018. It now, come October, I think October of this year, all states, in theory, are supposed to have a prevention plan in place that's approved by our federal partners. I don't know that all states are going to make the mark. I think there's also some concessions and flexibilities that have been created for those states that needed to take a little more time during the pandemic to actually build their prevention plan. Here in Oregon, that was the other thing that we were able to do, actually maybe a little more efficiently because we were doing things virtually, is be able to push forward and create a collaborative plan that we submitted in November of 2020 and got our official approval letter on April 1st, which is actually one of the fastest response times the Children has given to any jurisdiction in approving the prevention plan. And again, the prevention plan is a tool in the bigger prevention conversation. And what I didn't do is, and I will following this meeting, is I'll make sure that you have copies of the prevention plan that was submitted so that you can look through it and review it. So just really, there are some pretty technical requirements in Family First. What Family First isn't is a grant. It isn't like, here's a bucket of money, go do what you want, those sort of things. There are lots of requirements, really technical requirements, in order for states to actually access and be reimbursed for services. And so that is an important nuance that I like to remind folks, but we also have some opportunities to think about, even with a reimbursement process, how do we then reinvest dollars that may, GF dollars, other federal dollars that we may have used in this work in different places if we're able to actually be able to access the Family First reimbursement dollars. There's lots of definitions and I won't go into detail about this. Happy to answer questions if folks want to kind of nerd out on federal policy anytime. I'm happy to. You'll see it evident in the prevention plan when you get a chance to read through it. Here's though, I think, where some of our conversation can focus on today. And what the Family First federal legislation also did was create the opportunity for states to use federal funding in really supporting kinship navigator programs, better supporting reunification supports. So when children do have to come in to foster care, our work is to try and reunify them with their parents or family, and then being able to support them as that happens so that they're not coming back into care. Really focused on, what are the mechanisms that we are using to support our resource families or foster parents in the work that they're doing alongside us and on our behalf in many cases. And it added some dollars and some expectations to the CHAFE funding stream, which is targeted for older youth and young adults. And during this COVID period, and in a number of places in some of the emergency federal funding, there were additional dollars distributed to states to actually try and get those dollars into the hands of young people that are either preparing to leave the foster care system because of their age, or if they've already exited foster care and are under the age of 23 and in some cases 26, being able to help support them. And we've done that in around housing supports, education supports, cash assistance for those concrete needs that folks have had during the pandemic. And then the one piece is it requires that we as a state, as the 4E agency, are also working on focusing on the needs of young children and building our plans and strategies around preventing fatalities. February of 2020, we officially created a team that was focused on fatality prevention and review. And so our critical incidents are reviewed. We are part of a national safety collaborative where we are talking with other states and really trying to share share learning strategies, approaches to preventing fatalities, but also really embedding the practice of not being afraid to do reviews on your work and your practice. And what can we do to learn from things that go well? What can we do to learn when things don't go well and there's a poor outcome? And so I think in prevention opportunities, there is the opportunity to really think about transforming the child welfare system itself, investing in evidence-based interventions. And I would probably expand and say investing in promising interventions, culturally specific interventions and strategies really around prevention, that broader definition of prevention, making sure that everything that we're doing is with a trauma responsive lens, and that we're partnering across systems and really trying to, I think, decrease the amount of navigation skills a family might need to have to maneuver our systems and be able to get what they need without having to do that, where the systems are doing the navigation, and then being able to scale it up. Scale up our prevention and preservation and reduce our utilization and reliance on foster care. And just as a point of information, you know, here in Oregon, we've actually been reducing the number of children in foster care at a pretty steady rate over the last several years. And so we continue each time we pull up the number as it continues to go down, are continuing to be at the lowest number that we've been in over a decade of children entering into foster care. And that is balanced with a centralized hotline. The calls that are coming in, the number of assessments that we're doing isn't decreasing. And in fact, it's increasing I can't even say the words post-pandemic. As we're coming out of the pandemic, our front end is as busy as ever. And so really, it's really important to think about what is that prevention space then, as we're trying to serve more and more children outside of the intervention of foster care. And part of the requirements, and I won't spend a lot of time here, is on congregate care opportunities. There's lots of really technical requirements for what providers who serve children in group care settings need to meet in order for us to be able to place children there. And in Oregon, we in the 1921 session, I've already been talking about the 23-25 session, so I'm trying to do the backwards math of years. Passed an Oregon-specific piece of legislation that added some additional requirements than the federal requirements for our congregate care, all towards making sure that children are in appropriate placements and they're cared for when they need this level of care. And so, what is our plan or vision for prevention? And so there are a lot of things happening. We are one of the investments that came out of the legislative session through the budget was our ability to get some additional staff and some funding to build our own infrastructure around family preservation. Because right now I've got CPS staff who are doing the investigations, and I've got staff that are working in foster care. I don't have a workforce or a program structure for that in between, right? And so that work is just starting and connected to a lot of our implementation team conversations for Family First. We absolutely want to build it in alignment with our vision for transformation, with equity tools and a framework in place for that. And really working on our own skill building and maybe culture shift in some cases around, we absolutely think what we're creating and doing has to be driven by those that we serve. So those who have experienced our system as parents, as children, as young adults, we need the input around what does a family preservation system need to look like and contain, and not just have it be something that's being created at the state central office. And so that's that's work that we're working on, and it's the areas for improvement as always. We have a life meeting model, which is like a family team meeting that was part of our Title IV-E waiver program that we are looking at building out and expanding. And it's just opportunities, again, to ensure that those that we're serving are at the table driving the supports that they need and leading the way with our support. And then really looking at what is the child and family well-being system need to contain. And so I know I'm going through this really super fast. I want to, I talked a little bit, these are some of those technical requirements related to our prevention plan. There's time limits on interventions. The limitation, in Rebecca's opinion, we're always in trouble when I start referring to myself in third person, is, this is some of where there's room to grow in the federal legislation. It requires that an evidence-based intervention be listed on the Federal Prevention Clearinghouse, and there just are not very many listed right now in that approval process. And it's pretty limited and absolutely Western culture driven. So there's not a lot of interventions that are culturally specific or can talk about how they specifically work in particular communities or particular needs around our diverse population that we're serving. And Oregon is, a couple steps ahead, I think, in some ways, and I have a slide somewhere in here, where our Medicaid system allows for a number of tribal-specific interventions. And so we're pushing in our conversations with our federal partners about Family First needing to mirror some of that practice. And there's all sorts of contingencies about what can be reimbursed and not reimbursed, but you're not interested in that right now. Again, here, just, again, talking about the clearinghouse. And the other thing that I'll make sure that I follow up, Sue, and send to you is there's actually opportunities right now. There's a Federal Register request out asking for input and comments on the Prevention Clearinghouse. And I think it's open until the 16th of August. So I'll follow up with the email so that you have that link and can share it out of if folks have thoughts and opinions and perspectives that they want to add to the consideration about what this potential next iteration of a Prevention Clearinghouse might be, if chiming in there as well. And so in Oregon's prevention plan, we included 4 evidence-based practices. One is parents as teachers, and as you see here, it covers ages 0 to 5. And we selected these interventions intentionally for a starting place, knowing that there are a lot of other things that we actually ultimately want to put in our prevention plan to be included here. But we started with some interventions that we knew existed, and that there's some desire and interest for some building of capacity and expanding the availability of these services across Oregon. These 2 fall in the mental health category, the parent-child interaction therapy and the functional family therapy. Again, another set of age range, 2 to 7, and then I believe 11 to 18. And then motivational interviewing. And we have lots of debate and conversation about whether or not motivational interviewing is an intervention. I don't think it is, but it's on the list at the clearinghouse. I think it's an incredible strategy and skill set and tool that actually adds some opportunity for engagement skills and engaging with community and those that we're serving in really important ways, so that whatever intervention or work that we're doing with a child, a family, collateral entity, that we're able to support that in the best way possible. And so here is just a list of some additional interventions that came up in our planning discussions that are absolutely kind of interest. And as we think about our next phase, what are, what might we be ready for? What are the things we need to do to ramp up for that? And I would venture to say this is not an all-inclusive list by any stretch of the imagination. So there may be some ideas that you all have that we need to consider and have on this list. We right now are really focused on some of the technical things that have to be in place for us to actually draw down on the reimbursement. So we've got, how are we capturing it in our information system? What is the prevention plan that we're creating? So the case plan or service plan that we create with a family, what does that need to entail so that we can pull the pieces out that are required federally to get the reimbursement due? So we're kind of in the, I think the work group is called nuts and bolts. It's trying to figure out how do we operationalize the prevention plan now, and some of those technical things, technical ways that are not really terribly thrilling, but absolutely important when it comes to funding. And these are the list of the tribal practices that are already approved federally, actually, through the Medicaid program, that we're actually also looking at, are there ways to build capacity and to make sure that they are also available across the state, regardless of where our tribal families are living. And then one of the critical, important pieces connected to all of this of what we do that actually plays out in the third principle of our vision for transformation is really the importance of continuous quality improvement. And we have to, for the federal plan, be able to say, was it the right, who is it that we're serving with the intervention? Did the intervention get executed per fidelity to the model? What is our return on investment? And what are the implementation considerations that we have? We have to do all of that and report that back to our feds. But that's actually what we should be doing in general when we are identifying strategies and efforts, so that we're learning along the way. And the idea is that we don't want to, our prevention plan is a 5-year plan. We don't want to just wait till the end of that 5-year period and then look back and say, did it work? We want to build in ways along the way for us to really figure out, is it working? Are there things that we need to differently support it with? Consider, and those sort of things, so that we can course correct and continue to learn and identify where there might be gaps. So that is the world's fastest presentation on family first and prevention. And what I would just say as I open it up really for discussion and questions is, I think we're in a space where we've got some opportunity both to shore up things and activities or relationships that currently exist, and think about where are the places that we need to grow and what are some shared strategies for how we have that happen, right? So it moves from, conceptual well-being system into an actual development of a well-being system. And so I think there's lots of possibilities. And again, child welfare is one piece of the puzzle, and, looking for ways that we are really meeting the needs of the entire spectrum of the needs that children and families have, but also working on the places that we know systemically exist that, our historical relationship with families and communities has not been great because we're a system that, oftentimes causes trauma, and we have a disproportionate impact on communities of color, and all the things, right? So we're really looking to build forward. And it's interesting as we, we're working through the challenges that the pandemic brought with us early on. I talked about, like, we're not looking for how do we get back to normal, because normal wasn't our best self. It really is, how do we create what it is that's needed and build towards that, and really intentionally dismantle some of the things that are built into our system and other systems that make it really difficult for families to trust us and have a generational impact on families and communities. So I'm going to stop talking there and ask if there are questions, thoughts, reflections. Hi, Collie.
Hi, so there's a lot, that was a lot of information.
I know, sorry.
I have a lot of questions, but I think the biggest thing I wanted to flag was the use of the parents as teachers. It's actually, we've had a number of culturally specific providers talk about the lack of cultural responsiveness of that training. And I would almost say we've had our staff participate, and some have said it's culturally negligent. So I wonder why that is the primary program, and how there's so much more. I mean, parents as teachers has been around for a while. I feel like people just keep going back to it. But I'm wondering, like, what kind of input are you getting from providers that serve kids of color that are culturally specific? Because it has not gone over well, and it's been a mandatory. There's contracts with Multnomah County that require that training, which is why many of them have. And I know the Coalition of Communities of Color has talked about this. So I was surprised to see it on your presentation.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what is happening to ensure that there are other trainings that are a lot more culturally sound.
Yeah, and that's great feedback, Collie. And so I think there was a collaborative process in kind of identifying interventions, and our choice of interventions was limited to what is on the National Prevention Clearinghouse. And so I think that's one limitation. I would absolutely be delighted in having some follow-up conversation with you or anyone else that you recommend to really be able to then push. I think there's opportunities to push at the federal level. That's always my great joy to push on them. But I think as in the consideration of implementation and what does it mean as we look to build capacity, and even looking deeper into the model of making some decisions, like it's in our plan now. Maybe we decide that it isn't something that we carry on into, perpetuity, right? So I think there's some opportunities to continue to inform that. And I'm always willing to try and create waves, even with the folks that create evidence-based practices.
Yes, Peg.
Well, first of all, I really applaud that vision of transformation for child welfare. I think for many reasons. I've done child abuse work for about 20 years, and DHS or child welfare has always been the bad guy. And it would be great for the community as a whole to not be afraid of child welfare when our goals are really the same. It's to keep kids safe and keep kids healthy. And I agree with Kali. I think some of it's the modalities that you have available to use in your prevention programs are somewhat limited. And I think there perhaps are better ones out there, and lots of good collaboration, I think, with other members of the community that have some experience in prevention. But boy, if we can have that vision of prevention as opposed to just acting after the fact when harm or abuse has taken place, I think that's going to work great for families and also work great for retention of child welfare workers, because that's a huge issue that people come very idealistic and then they leave. So I really applaud the overall vision. I think it can be fine-tuned, but I understand that you have some limitations.
Yeah, and we're open. So the vision for transformation is intended to be a living document. I view even our federal documents as living documents. We have opportunities to change course and add additional information and all those sort of things. So I absolutely welcome the additional feedback and input. And frankly, I think we probably can use some diversity even in the folks that have been sitting around the table, though it is a large group, not entirely sure it is fully representative of all of the communities that we serve. And so if there's interest, desire, nominations, let me know, and I will find a way to make sure folks are helping inform those decisions.
All right. Other questions of Rebecca or comments? Rebecca, one thing I would just throw out, you talked about shared strategies for the development of a well-being system. And I would love to explore with you or some of your staff, where can the council fit into that? Knowing that we focus on 0 to 5-year-olds or prenatal to 5. So we're a defined sector of your bigger population, but I don't know of any sort of table that is set currently for having those conversations.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sue. And I think it's probably an intentional table to figure out where it sits. There have been, so I've been here for 1.5 years there, and obviously we've been limited in in gathering people together outside of virtual space. I think there are some places, and I had a conversation actually just today with Fairboris and talked about the fact that, I, as the child welfare director, can talk about a well-being system, till I'm blue in the face. I have one system that I'm responsible for, and there's all these other systems. And when I say systems, I'm also including providers, right? The provider communities and those sort of things of like really thinking about what's the forum for us all to be gathering and coming up with what our strategies, what our vision is for it, what our strategies are, and putting action to it. I'm definitely not one to want to plan just to have a plan. I'd rather have action steps identified. And so that's where my head is, where my wheels are turning now is pushing my boss and others that I'm not the boss of into kind of creating the opportunity to have that space. And I just think about, envisioning, a few days that we're really just kind of, identifying ideas and strategies and then coming up with some action items for what we do. There was huge investment made from the legislature. And I think there's just lots of opportunities for us to be really intentional and strategic about how we use those investments and really craft a path to a well-being system that when I talk with folks, that's what folks want. Right. And that means that we've got to do things differently because that's not the system. Those aren't the systems we have. Right. And so we've got to, I think, be bold in pushing through that. The other space that I will say, though, Sue, is Oregon was selected as, I think, the second tier in the Thriving Families, Safer Children initiative, collaborative. I'm not sure how they fully describe it, but it's a public-private partnership with the Administration for Children and Families at the federal level, Prevent Child Abuse, Casey Family Programs, and Annie E. Casey. And so it's been one of the things that I think has been partly a casualty of just time during the legislative session, but we're really at the kind of beginning stages of figuring out how that space actually could be some of those platforms to create opportunities for the community actually to say what it is that's needed, and the systems, the funders, the money folks create the path for that to happen. So I'm happy to share additional information as it evolves, or if folks want to be involved in that conversation, just letting me know and I can make sure you're looped in.
Okay, yeah, that would be great, Rebecca. it's interesting, later this afternoon, after we take a break, we're going to be talking about the council actually holding listening sessions in some targeted communities in the state, and trying to listen to the experts, you know, with the lived experience, to tell us why can't they access services. We're not looking for the people who already are connected to all of these different systems, but who haven't figured out a way to access them. So obviously there are a lot of engagement strategies going on in Oregon. So if there's any way to try to coordinate some of those, it would be helpful.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions of Rebecca or comments?
See, George's hand is up.
Yeah. My comment, Rebecca, was really just kind of, I guess, echoing a little bit of what Sue is getting at. We're operating in a pandemic, and I guess my viewpoint has been that folks have not been as have been getting as much access or opportunities to receive services during this time, and I still feel like this next year will be a struggle year. And I didn't see in the report or presentation how you plan to resolve some of those barriers, or how you can provide more access and opportunity during this time. I do, you know, hearing that the public listening sessions and engagement is there, that's great. I just think that another variable to really kind of get at will be, how do you do all of these things while in a pandemic with limited engagement of human interaction and support? I know for schools, you know, kids that were being mistreated or having any kind of, you know, incident reports for child abuse, neglect was severely down. And I know that it was going on, and just how you're going to deal with that, or how you're going to be getting good services during a pandemic, is still a concern that I have.
Yeah, I share that concern, George. I think, you know, so our experience from child welfare with the pandemic was, you know, kind of immediately with the stay-at-home order, we saw a dramatic drop in the number of calls that we got to the centralized hotline. That actually started to pick up May-ish, June, and has been on the rise as far as number of calls, as far as call volume, has been on the rise every month since then, and back to almost the same levels this spring as the previous year before the pre-pandemic year. So just to know that, I think one of the other areas, in all honesty, that we're wrestling with, and I don't have the answers, is we still have about 40% of the calls that come to the hotline not being about child abuse or neglect. And that worries me because that is someone reaching out. Some folks are calling for information. They can't remember who their caseworker is, or they're wanting to know, you know, how to become a foster parent, or other things like that. And that absolutely, you know, impacts, you know, our call volume, right? The thing that we do know, and this is what I wanted to call out here, is that, you know, we still are getting calls. Our educators are our number one reporters. And so with kids back in school in some form or fashion, that has absolutely increased. The issue is that of the mandated reporters, their concerns are least likely to be at the level that requires us to screen in and then take action. And what that says to me is there is, you know, there are educators that are worried about children and families, and the hotline is the place they call. And if it doesn't get screened in, then those the worries or those needs that for a family and a child don't get met, because our slice is to respond to maltreatment. And So when I talk about a child well-being system, it's those families that end up, concerns get screened out, all those sort of things. That's my worry in that space. I also, in all honesty, have been wrestling with, you know, some of the narrative, and this is not at all what you said, some of the narrative of, you know, the assumption that because kids aren't in school or that they're with their families, that they're being harmed. We absolutely know that there is abuse that's happening because abuse happened before the pandemic, right? But it becomes a worry for me because in many of those conversations, then it then starts to translate into families who are experiencing poverty, families of color, those sort of things. And I worry about just perpetuating, you know, some of the systemic issues and structures in those conversations, and also want to make sure that kids and families are getting what they need and that kids are okay in all of those spaces. And so that's kind of what we're wrestling with. And the services, the services question is an interesting one, and it's a challenge in some ways because the child welfare agency isn't necessarily the service provider. We are the payer for service, the referrer for service, but we are not the ones that are actually doing the service for the most part, right? And so it is also then, how are we collectively in communities with our providers and services working to make sure that those things are happening and that families and kids are able to get those services and their needs met even in the space of this pandemic. You know, because the access has absolutely been diminished, and that's something I think we're going to just continue to have to wrestle with. And I agree with you. I think this next year is going to continue to be a year of challenge, where we're learning and discovering things, and also, you know, finding some other places where there's gaps in the ability to meet the needs of kids and families and communities.
Yeah.
So I welcome any ideas that you have, George.
Well, I am sure the council is going to be talking about this again, probably at our August meeting, and sort of a follow-up, and see how can we support the work you're doing, Rebecca, because that's our work as well.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to come and share, you know, the vision and where we're hoping to play a role in building a well-being system. And so you know how to find me. I am happy to come back. I'm happy to be put, you know, happy to be pushed and challenged. And you know, any suggestions that folks have, please send them my way. We can have, you know, separate discussions if needed. You know, I'm here with my hand out as a partner, you know, wanting to be engaged in this work with all of you to meet the needs of families in ways that we probably haven't before. And so I just welcome it and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all.
All right, thank you, Rebecca.
Right.
We also appreciate your time. So,
all right, take care.
We will be in touch. Okay,
all
bye-bye.
Right.
So council, we are going to take a 15-minute break, which I'm sure we all need. I've been chatting with David, and I think we're going to just push the David and Troy presentation to our August meeting, because we're going to be talking about legislation, a whole range of legislation affecting the early learning division in August. So we'll just move that to the next agenda. And after our break, we will come to this community listening sessions, and Peter's going to kind of step us through that proposal. And it certainly ties into a lot of what we've been hearing earlier in this meeting. So it's pretty exciting, I think. So we'll do that when we come back from break, and it is what, 3:25. So we will be back at 3:40. Okay, thank you. Very hot. Okay. What a sense of power, Remy.
I am the Zoom master.
Yes, you are.
Sometimes it's better than others.
Well, yes, we'll figure that out. We'll figure that out. All right. Excuse me. Welcome back, everybody. Wow. We certainly heard a lot of information. Yeah. You know, as I listened to all of our partners speak, except for the Early Learning Division, whom we will hear from next month, but lots of opportunities and actually lots of requests for us to engage with them. You know, the HEC has ideas of how we can work with them, and obviously this family preservation, there are probably a myriad ways that we could work with Rebecca and her team on family preservation and getting ahead of the curve, and social determinants of health. And then what Colt said about us working more closely with the State Board of Education. We've talked about that actually for several months, but now it's actually being mandated by different legislation. So lots of opportunities. And when we do your updates at the end of the meeting today, if it works for you to include in your comments, we really want to hear what's happening on the ground in your regions and your arenas, and also how that might translate into discussion points for the August agenda and discussion for the October retreat. So we've started, obviously those agendas are being planned, but getting your any ideas you might have today would be great. And then we can talk about the retreat again in August. So with that, let me go to the other agenda item, which is the listening sessions, which, you know, we've been talking about for a couple of months now. And with Carrie McCann's help from Build and David and Remy and Harriet, Peter and I've had a couple of meetings with them to put together this proposal that is on the agenda and in front of us today. And we really need your input, agreement, additions, subtractions, whatever. And I'm going to let Peter step us through this, and then we'll see where we end up. So Peter, I will turn it over to you. Thank you. And you're muted, Peter.
Gotcha. Yeah, very good. Thanks. I'm going to just point you towards the packet. I think it's page 7. I'll grab the screen here if that's okay too. So page 7 of your packet has the memo about the visiting, the community listening sessions, and there's a ton of information here, and we've gotten already a kind of ton of information today. I don't want to overload you with information, but we are looking for the council to give a thumbs up with this approach, which basically Sue and I have met, as Sue mentioned, with the folks from Build. We talked through the data that they've collected. They showed us the data in our last meeting. We also have a bunch of different slides to go through if you want to refer back the data. But we've got to kind of come down to saying, you know, how do we do this in a way that works? Do a online, do a Zoom type of listening session in different communities. We looked at a couple to identify to start off with, where we felt we had the combination of both the data supporting the need, which is not hard to do in the state of Oregon, but also the kind of logistical tools in place to try to start putting this forward. So we looked at the Jackson County where I am, Multnomah County where Kali is. You know, can we start here and kind of start this process off and see if we can engage in a process that works and during the listening session, which has kind of a really clear purpose. And then I'll talk you through the memo here, starting on page 8. So you can see the purpose that's listed. It's really to listen, understand, and learn, develop experiences, support exploration of how historically and today Individuals, communities have organized for self-determination, inclusion, and fairness, and applied lessons learned to design, develop, modify, and implement programs, services, and initiatives. So that's kind of the purposes of doing this. It's like what's been talked about continuously. How do we get the voice of experience? How do we get people actually informing us of what they're going through in a real straightforward and powerful way? We went through this whole process, selecting the communities, like I said, went through all the data, and then went through kind of logistical ideas of how we might be able to accomplish this in a fairly short period of time. With Jackson and Josephine counties, we have a Hispanic community and a rural community also that's been underserved. Traditionally, we also have the impact of the fires that happened in the Phoenix and Talent communities last year. Multnomah County, there's a focus on Black communities and neighborhoods. Again, if you want to go through the data on the data slides, we can go through that. We talked about reaching out to host organizations to basically help pull together these sessions. The host organization would get a small stipend, participants would get stipends too. We talked about having a structure that would be, we'd schedule 90 minutes, we'd plan on about 60 minutes of asking questions, kind of the formal Q&A part of it. We were looking to have groups no more than 10 parents from a community. So each person has a chance to not feel pressured, time pressure, they get a chance to talk and respond to the questions and engage with that. And we just talked about keeping the meetings themselves fairly small, not having a huge group of people that the parents are asked to address. So we came down with this proposed list of having one person from the host organization who may be the facilitator, or we'd have a facilitator from Build if needed, 2 members from the council, one of the agency directors or the Raise Up Oregon staff members, and up to 10 family members. As I said, we're not going to turn parents away. If there's more than 10 people who sign up, then we can add sessions for that community. We wanted to work out the protocol and questions ahead of time. So the protocols we're suggesting and the questions are, let's use these basic 7 questions, use those consistently. We're going to ask permission to record the sessions from the families so they know that we're going to be recording it. And as the documentation note here, it says the goal is to capture quotes, not notes, and organize them into themes, and they'll be able to share that with the full council when we do our retreat in October. So the timing is looking to be late September, early October. Bring the quotes to October to actually get the process of informing the council of the feedback from the communities. It has posed some questions for the council. I mentioned the stipends before. The stipends for family members would be $75 to $100 to participate, and the host organization would be $250 to $500. So whether the host organization is a Head Start or a different child care facility or the early learning hub, whatever works for the particular community to be the host organization. And again, the request from the council is that if you have organizations in your communities that you believe want to engage families and would like to use this process, then the Build staff is willing to work to implement this kind of structure and protocol for sessions scheduled in whatever community council members would like to do this process in. The council members' roles are to help identify potential host organizations and then come to one session. So we have to figure out how this will work logistically. But if each one of us can come to at least one of the sessions, and again, we're trying to have no more than 2 council members on any one session, but we can work that out and really kind of to listen to what we're being told, and then to work to do the protocol with an organization in your community if that is something that you would like to do. So that's kind of the overview. And Sue, I'd be happy to, if you want to add anything to that, you're more than welcome. Yep, so you're on mute, Sue.
Sorry. Thank you, Peter. Great overview. Several council members in earlier conversations have asked about, the follow-up. So we listen, we get quotes and all of that. So then what do we do? So Peter, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because we have discussed that.
Yeah, and that is really important, that there is actually a protocol for making sure that we're clear from the community members what they are asking. What are they asking? And if they're asking for a specific, why can't we get easier access to behavioral health services for young children in Grants Pass, Oregon? it's our job then to get that question recorded and to do follow up and say, here's how we're going to try to address what that barrier is and come back to the community. And so I can't remember, we said we'd come back within a year. I can't remember what the timeline was.
6 months.
6 months.
Right.
6 months. And then we'd go from there and say, okay, this is what we heard. This is what you wanted us to respond to. And here's our respond in a 6-month period.
Right, right. And the only other thing I'd add, and then we'd love to have questions and thoughts about this. But we're trying, and Peter mentioned this, we're trying to get to families who are not already connected to any system. So they aren't already accessing healthcare services or childcare or whatever. So that's why the host organization becomes incredibly important, because they're going to have to, number one, have the credibility and trust of parents, so parents will show up, but also they're going to need to help find the parents who aren't already in somebody's database. So, so it's really that outreach, and it says that in here, to those least connected families. So, thoughts, questions, comments?
I want to know what Kali's having for lunch. That's what I want to know. She's not eating till it's close to 4 o'clock, Kali. For God's sake, she's having lunch now.
It's been a long day.
Yeah, I did. Hi, it's Anne. I'm sorry, I was disconnected for a little bit of your description, Peter, and so I apologize if I miss some of the parts that I'm going to comment about. I do think it's really important for us to hear the reality of people's lives, and it's always hard to figure out how to do that in a way that is where you get genuine, authentic conversation, where you respect the people who are there, where and so on. And I think it's really is a challenge. We do a lot of community building work, and so we have a lot of sort of experience with this, and it's hard to figure out exactly what the right structure is. I think, if for people, if it's going to be on Zoom, that's one thing. If it's going to be, if people like us are in the room saying, well, hey, you poor people, how's your life going for you? And and tell us about, that, because we genuinely want to hear. It gets really hard. And so I guess I wonder if, I almost wonder whether there could be almost a 2-step process where there could be some people that aren't us in the room being present while we are, while we're asking people to share their experiences, but whether there's a more anthropological way to do this that allows for some of the issues that disconnected parents are feeling to be surfaced, that then we can process together with maybe a smaller number of parents or some who feel empowered and confident enough to speak with us and then can hear what we're saying, what the messages are and comment on it. I'm just worried about the power dynamic, the disconnect, and so on. And I'm just wondering whether there's some kind of a lower stakes, earlier step that allows parents to be interviewed and for some themes to be surfaced, and then some kind of a group that processes information together. Or I know you've probably thought about all of these things, but I'm still puzzling about what the right structure is to hear from this. And then the second thing is, as you noted, Sue, with several of the people who we heard from today, Liesl and Rebecca, everybody's doing listening sessions, and it's sort of like, that's starting to not feel good. So anyway, those are just 2 kind of themes that are on my mind.
Yep. Kali, do you want to make a comment? And then Peter, I'll let you respond to Anne.
Well, when Anne was talking, it made me think about what we did once when we were doing youth listening sessions, because the exact same thing came up. Youth aren't always taken seriously, and there was a concern of adults in leadership talking to young people. What we did was we created a fishbowl, and it was facilitated by a teacher or someone they knew. And
they just asked questions and talked, and we were there to just listen on the outer. I mean, it was a literal, like we were in concentric circles, and we were on the outside part of the circle. They were inner circles, and we just listened. And I think the facilitator, the person talking to them, was able to help them feel like it was just a conversation between him and them. And it made it so we were sort of like eavesdropping on something, but it wasn't intimidating. And I don't know if we can use something like that where we're listening, but we're not asking the questions. We're not front and center. We're sort of on the outside and giving them the space to be central in the room to share story. It's just an idea of like a tactic that might address some of what Anne is. I think her concerns are valid, and I'm just trying to think of ideas of what we might be able to do.
Yeah. So Carrie's joined us, and she put a thing in the chat that is the process Bill promotes. Is that the council members wouldn't be talking, the people who are there, to be part of it aren't talking. The only people who are talking are the facilitator and the parents, if I have that right, Carrie.
Yeah, definitely. And we've done this in other places, so we can definitely look out for that power dynamic, and for specific communities. I think the involvement of the host organization is really important. So I think that's why we said that Build would either support the host organization in being the facilitator, which means actually walking through the questions and having the discussion. Not everybody that's listed on that list. They're explained of who they are and why they're there and why they care about what the families have to say and what they want to do with the information and how they'll come back to the family. So we definitely try to address both the power dynamic, not have the people just be strangers in the room, but we reduce the power dynamic because it's really about caring about what the family members say and then coming back. So the feedback loop part of this will be really, really important. So this isn't a one-time event for the communities that we'll go to in the fall.
Yeah, one other thing, like we gave space for people to just be honest and share their frustration or concerns. So there were like kids or youth that were like, "You never listened to us. Like this better not be a futile." They were able to be explicit in their concerns too, and I think that was important. So it put us on guard to really, know what their concerns were and take it seriously. I think the council obviously takes this seriously, but we shouldn't, providing the freedom to talk about whatever is on their mind, I think is important. I don't know if that addresses it, Anne, or if you still feel like there's, concerns that would come from some of the communities.
I guess I still, my question to myself is whether still a two-stage process would work where a group could talk among themselves and sort of share listen, know what questions we want, talk among themselves, sort of surface some of the issues, and then sort of feel like they're organized when they have a conversation with us and feel like they don't have to come up with something out of the blue when these representatives from the governor's office walk in the door.
I think the other thing, Anna, is what we're listening for is they don't have to have figured out everything. We're not looking for them to have a polished response. It's up to us to listen to them, take their quotes, organize them by themes, think about where there's action that needs to be taken. That's the responsibility of local, state, that kind of thing, because everything we hear won't be the responsibility of state. But then we would come back to them to say, was what we heard accurate? And a lot of communities will share back, oh, there's some nuances you missed. So let's share our nuances. And then we have some ideas of where we could take action. What do you think about those actions? So they don't have to necessarily, they might have actions that they'll know right off the bat that they want, but they don't have an obligation of performance or ideas. They're sharing their experiences. Yeah. And those can be positive or negative. And then it's up to us to translate it in. Is there opportunities to change how government does business that would be beneficial to this community? And before any of those things were tried, you would be checking back in with them. Did we hear you right?
That's helpful. Carrie, have you ever done sort of a preliminary set of interviews with people before they walk in the room so that you have some of the issues kind of surfaced in advance?
Not in this scenario. Obviously, we've done other kinds of engagement with families that would include interviews but for this process, we've done it in Black, Hispanic, Native American, poor rural communities in New Jersey, Alabama, Minnesota, California, I think I already said Minnesota. So we have a lot of different kinds of communities under our belt. So I think it's really the relationship with the host organization becomes the really important piece here.
Yeah, then the trusted facilitator. Yeah.
Right. Okay, good questions and comments, and other thoughts from council members. Katie.
Just wondering, I know the purpose of this is to listen to families, but have we given any thought, or did I miss this, to talking to providers as well? We did listening sessions that blended, but it mostly turned out to be providers all throughout Central Oregon. Gosh, it was maybe 3 or 4 summers ago with the Chamber Foundation. And it was striking. I learned a lot about some of the challenges in operating either a center or an in-home facility. And I don't know, it just seems like that's another piece of the information of the folks who are actually delivering the services and the community who is using the services.
Yeah, good question, Katie. And this, we've not been focusing on childcare, first of all. This is really meant to be multi-sector. So they may have some health concerns. They may not have housing. They may, whatever. So we haven't focused on childcare intentionally. And we really have only talked about trying to get to parents, to families in this. Now, there may be a need to do a provider survey of some sort, perhaps at another time or with another focus. I know the ELD is doing a gajillion of those stakeholder engagement sessions in the coming year with this whole 3073 rollout. So I think that base is being covered, but David can correct me if I'm wrong. So this was really focused on families and families.
I understand.
Yeah, who aren't in the service stream already.
Gotcha.
So, yes. Okay. So other questions, and then I want to go back to Anne's comment and just see, Carrie, what you would think of trying to build in a 2-stage. For me, I think part of the value of the listening session for me personally would be hearing the parents talk and trying to really understand what the issues are. But perhaps I can read somebody's notes that would tell me
the interpretation of what the parents are saying. So I think we definitely, whatever the session is that we capture, we want to capture parents speaking where we can capture their quotes and not have a layer of extra interpretation. The recording is only for transcription so that we can categorize quotes by themes of what parents are sharing with you across communities. And so then, and I think the question is, what's the support that the parents will feel that will make them helpful and comfortable, but not be a time burden? And what is the, I think what you see in the protocol is trying to honor parents' time, right? So max 90 minutes, only an hour of actual question answering. So you might end early. They're getting a stipend for participating. And so it's whether if we increase the time, should we increase the stipend? Will they participate if it's more than that amount of time? So that's something else to consider.
So I'm not sure, Anne, were you suggesting that the parents have the initial session with the host and a facilitator and then have a subsequent session with the rest of us listening? Or were you suggesting that we, the council and others, just get the notes from the host and the facilitator?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to grapple with is how to make sure that the participants feel they can trust the environment that they're in, and that they do feel empowered to speak and to speak their truth. And so I feel like we just have to attend to that. When in the work that we've done, it takes 2 or 3 years to really get trusting conversations going on with multiple interactions with a lot of things. And so I don't have a good sense of how to do this in such a one-off way. And, and Bill has experience doing it. It's just, I think that if we can just think about trusting the trust and the power dynamics, and as you say, Carrie, and also respecting their time and believing that it's worth their while to do that. We do a lot of leadership development work that takes a while for the spouses of Latinx farm workers to actually feel comfortable to be able to talk to anybody else about the reality of their lives and to speak their truths in a public setting. It's really nervous making, So
I totally agree with you, Anne. So I think exploring with the host organizations in these communities, your experience, who are we talking about, and then what would their specific recommendations well taken. I think we've kept these small, and the host organization is the linchpin for this.
Yeah.
And that we could share with you in between now and maybe the August meeting some results or dynamics, because I don't think we view this as one-off. You're right, like you're only going to get so much information the first time. We're going to experience it across several families and several sessions. We're going to try to understand what was given to us, and then we go back. And so this, in a way, is not a one-off, because then there's an opportunity to say, oh, we didn't complete an idea, or there's some nuance here that you didn't get. So for example, New Jersey, they talked about a problem with labor. The labor department heard the conversation. They went back, they came back and said, here's all these training certificate programs we could implement in your community. And they went, oh, wait a minute, we have a stack of training certificates. That's actually not what we meant. And then there was a further conversation. So that meant the state agency didn't go down a solution that wasn't the right solution to the problem. And so there will be a feedback loop to this process and an engagement with your public partners around what are we hearing and how does that inform our work.
Yeah. No, I know you come with a lot of experience in this, and so I appreciate thinking about all of that and making it sort of respectful of the people who are there, worth their time, helping to hear their honest truth. And it will require local relationships that are trusted. Yeah.
So Peter, because we are talking about targeting your part of the state, what are your thoughts about this? What's your reaction to this conversation?
Well, it's interesting. We spent 11 months developing a family advisory council for our collaboration, and everything Anne's saying is true. It takes a lot of time to get people to develop that relationship of trust. We basically had these kind of informal discussions for 11 months before we brought people together as a group to have discussions together. So that is true. My experience, though, is that once we did bring people together, they were very glad to have the opportunity to talk about what's going on in their lives. They're very, the frustrations they were feeling over, I had one participant talk about being a new mom and the way she was treated in the healthcare system, as if she was an idiot. And she's not an idiot. And yet she felt that the people who worked with her while she was having her baby and after she had her baby spoke down to her constantly. And she wanted to tell that story, and she wanted that story to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm feeling that it's again, it goes back to who's inviting the family members in, because that's really crucial. So I was kind of brainstorming while Anne was talking about, well, if we had our host organization be the hub, or our host organization be, Boys and Girls Club, I could still think it'd be some of the people that we have on our family advisory council that would be important to invite people in, because they're the ones who have connections in their neighborhoods and connections in their communities. They can say, hey, this is something that if you want to get your voice heard, here's a way you can do it, spend an hour and a half of your time to do it if you're interested in doing it. But I think that those invitations have to be made on that personal level too.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Okay, so council, are you comfortable with us moving forward with this concept? Using Peter's area, so the Jackson Josephine as one target area based on data, but also honestly based on Peter being there and in the middle of this environment. And then also doing something in Multnomah County, leaning on Kali's connections and figuring out Multnomah, which will probably be a somewhat different approach or scenario than we find in rural Jackson Josephine. And see, you know, how does it go in identifying host organizations and get a sense of whether this idea of 2 steps would be preferable to just 1 step. And I'm guessing the host organizations would have feedback on that. Kali?
I have a question because I think when we spoke about it, you had talked about people disconnected from services.
Right.
So is that still the aim? Or as I was listening to Peter, like if it's the hub, that means they're connected. Like if I'm using the hub as sort of the touch point. So I'm just trying to get clarity on how connected or disconnected are the populations that we're trying to get.
That's the catch-22, because they have to be connected enough so that somebody knows them.
Yeah.
but not so connected that they're part of, like, you know, already part of the Head Start system where they're, you know, getting the peer support and stuff from the Head Start system. So that is a challenge.
And I just want to say we have field-based staff, including one who lives in Woodburn, who's a real, who does leadership development throughout the Latinx community and does a lot of work with young parents. And so we have some field-based staff who have deep connections who might be able to help if you wanted to do something with the Latinx farm worker population, or, you know, we have someone in Coos Bay, or we have someone in Union County who knows all of Eastern Oregon, you know, so who does have relationships and could build some of those connections.
Great, thank you, Anne. And I think leaning on council members to help identify possible hosts will be really critical. And hopefully Peter and Kali both will be open to helping play those roles. So any opposition to moving forward with this? I mean, is this a thumbs up for council members? And let's see what we can do with this in the next few months.
And if it's not productive, again, there are other listening sessions going on by other agencies. We can dump this. I mean, that's one of the, you know, if it's working, do more of it. If it's not working, dump and do something else.
Yeah.
And Carrie, do you have some experience on how parents were recruited to be invited to participate in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the host organization knowing other people, kind of like what Anne was talking about, of people who are embedded in communities. So I did one in California, right on the Oregon border with the Karuk tribe. And I worked with the CCDF administrator of the tribe, but then he had particular people, women leaders, who reached out to parents of young children. And and of course that was pre-pandemic, so they came for dinner. And then we had a conversation around the room. But my colleague Sherry, who came and presented with the data, has done it in several states virtually and has still had success with it. So So it's really about, right, it might not be really the early learning hub that's reaching out to the families that they feel are less connected, but it might be the hub say, here are the 3 or 4 organizations that I would go to, or the 3 or 4 like individual leaders who are voices for their community that I would go to that would help recruit families.
Yeah, I think that's right, Carrie. I mean, there are some organizations that, you know, that are trusted. There's, you know, CAUSA of Oregon or PCUN or something like that, or farm worker housing, you know, that would be different than an early learning hub. Yeah.
Right.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess, Peter, if you agree with me, we're going to suggest that we move forward with this, hearing no objections to the idea. And we'll see what evolves as far as the host organization and our next steps. Does that sound like a plan? Thumbs up? Okay. Okay. Moving forward. Thank you. Great conversation. And I totally understand and agree with your concerns about the power imbalance. And yes, these people are overpowered all the time. So we don't want to add to that stressful situation. So the last thing on our agenda is to listen to all of you, hopefully providing updates on what is going on in your communities or in your professions, sort of however you want to present it. And then we'll try to tie it into, to the extent we can, the August council meeting and then the retreat, if we see some themes that kind of go through these conversations. So who would like to start?
I can start.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, I'll talk a little bit about healthcare, because healthcare is incredibly busy right now, particularly for this time of year. Hospitals throughout Oregon are just overloaded, not necessarily with children, but with kind of basic healthcare needs, and not necessarily with COVID. I think people had put off healthcare, but resources are slim. We've had hospitals quite distant from us wanting to transfer patients here, uncharacteristically, where we don't offer any better services than what they could offer. They're just full. And I think one of our agency directors talked about the nursing shortage. That certainly is a problem throughout the state currently, that oftentimes it's not because of lack of beds that we can't provide care, but it's because we don't have staff to care for them. I think talking about COVID a little bit, I would agree with George. I think this is going to be another challenging year. I certainly hope that kids will be back in person, but I think kids are going to be much more affected by this Delta variant than what we have seen in the past, unfortunately. And we're already seeing hospitalizations in children's hospitals go up just because the Delta variant is more contagious and somehow seems to affect them. The viral load seems to be higher, so they seem to be a little more ill. The American Academy of Pediatrics, and I think just today the CDC came out with a recommendation that all kids over 2 that are going to be in school settings should wear masks. And I know there's a lot of public opinion about that, but I think that's going to be the recommendation. As we get kids back to school in person, and if that's what gets kids back to school in person, I certainly would support that. I think it is going to be a while before we get our youngest kids vaccinated. The hope is maybe the school-aged kids, 5 and older, can get vaccinated, but that's kind of it for healthcare. Just touching base on child abuse and that part of my world, we are seeing incredibly a marked increase in cases And I would agree exactly about April or May, we started seeing increase in the number of assessments we were doing. And a lot of them are historical, that, you know, things happened in the past. And I agree, we have to be careful about saying, oh, it's because kids were home. I think we really have to look at the stressors that families are under, and we know that that increases abuse regardless of people's socioeconomic status, that those stressors increase the incidence of abuse and domestic violence. On a brighter note, another one of the bills that passed the legislature was funding for child abuse assessment centers, and to increase some reimbursement and money towards prevention training and mental health services, for trauma-based mental health services to be offered through child abuse assessment centers. So I think those are all positive things. And the Oregon Child Abuse Assessments, or Child Abuse Solutions, it's OCAS, that's the new name, is going to be kind of overseeing that funding. Kind of on a local level for me, the vision of transformation and the family preservation thing sort of rang a bell. We have a committee that's relatively new within the last year called the Family Wellbeing Council, and really was brought into place to try and be more collaborative with the community services, so that we weren't duplicating services, and we were really identifying families' needs that were at risk, or identified as being families that needed more services prior to reaching the level of child welfare involvement, and at the same time supporting foster parents. Yeah, I guess that's kind of it. That's sort of what we're doing in our community.
Awesome. Peg, quick question on the Family Wellbeing Council. I assume that's a cross-sector group?
Yeah, it is. And we've got people with lived experience that have been involved in the child welfare system. We have some family navigators. We have some family support people. We have mental health providers, educators, healthcare providers, mental health people, various social service agencies, as well as our ODHS involved.
Got it. Okay. Super. Okay, thank you. Great update. Whew, what a lot going on. Who else wants to go? Katie.
I'll go since I'm fading fast. I really apologize, guys. I don't have COVID. I just have your garden variety crud.
We're sorry you have the crud.
Yeah, it's not been fun. I'm really excited to share with you that we're starting this new childcare pilot. It's the one that we've been working on for 3 or 4 years now, with OSU Cascades and Central Oregon Community College getting together. And essentially they're calling it the Little Kits, because OSU is beavers and COCC is cougars, and both their offspring are called kits. So that's how we came up with the name, which is kind of fun. But it's built around, we got $2 million, $1 million from Deschutes County and $1 million from ARPA from Senator Knope from his allocation. And what we'll do is build a mobile classroom, basically retrofitted for infants through 5 years old. At peak, we're hoping to serve about 100 children and start with one facility until we get the bugs out of it. And so what the 2 higher ed institutions are going to do is work together to develop the high quality curriculum based on, early brain development that is at OSU. And then COCC is also going to add their childcare programs, so it can help populate the classroom with folks who are interns. So it'll be kind of like a child care or a laboratory almost, just having the students actually interacting and involved and taking care of the kids. Doing it, putting it on their land, probably at OSU, reduces the overhead. They're centralizing the services. So when they expand this, it's all through a central hub to save operational costs. Then again, supplement the caretaking with folks who are actually studying in this field. And in the meantime, trying to prime the pump to increase the amount of folks getting into this field, because like everywhere else, the labor shortage is very real in Central Oregon for anything from teachers to childcare providers. So we're going to do that. We're also applying for a federal grant for paid internships so that the people who are volunteering and coming in and learning about early child development can get paid to do so. And I'm missing another piece, but it's basically a collaboration that's going to start with one facility. And if we do it well, the whole idea is this gets duplicated throughout the county and throughout the region. And that might happen next year after we have our first year under our belt. And the great thing about it is it's one of those things where it's going to focus mostly on faculty and student children, but it's one of those things that is so collaborative in nature that we can also do 24-hour childcare and allow the community to come in and do it at a cost that's reduced. So if you're working McDonald's night shift or for a hotel, or you're a student or whatever it happens to be, that the goal is to have childcare there after hours. So folks who do swing shifts have a place to take their kids, which is pretty non-existent here right now. So the cost overall, we're hoping to keep low through shared costs in hiring folks and getting services, and also just being on public land to start. And we'll look for other properties that also give us that leg up on getting the economics of this to work by either getting a free or reduced cost for a site. So very excited about it. The people who will go to work there, by the way, will be making, I think we're looking at $45,000 for the manager of the facility, and 35,000, something like that. I think it was 35 for folks who are actually in charge of the child care. So not great living, but way above what people are earning here right now. So trying to set a precedent to see how we can duplicate not just 100 child facility, but can we make them smaller? Can they partner with in-home facilities so we can provide the programming and the scheduling and the hiring of staff and keep those overhead costs down without sacrificing the quality? So we're really excited about it. We've worked a long time. And as you know, I thought it was gone for a while. And those ARPA funds just gave it the shot in the arm.
Yay. Nice going, Katie. You didn't give it up.
Yeah. And so I'm really pumped about it, that we're finally getting to try this thing out. So it's very cool.
Great. It could be a model for lots of places in this state.
Yeah.
So super. Congratulations.
Thanks.
I'd love to go next. I think I could segue off of Katie a little bit. We started a paid internship program here at the Alternative High School, Central Medford High School. We only took 8 students through it, but 4 of them are still working in the field after going through it, which was kind of fun. But overall, Katie, on the issue of payment and workforce, which you're all focused on, I had this idea. I was part of a discussion with one of our CCOs about the waiver that's being applied for by OHA for Medicaid, for the Oregon Health Plan, to get more flexibility, social determinants of health, et cetera. And I just had this idea on the workforce issue. Is there any way that we get a waiver to add essential workers to the Oregon Health Plan at a maybe a sliding scale or whatever that might be? Because we've talked about that for years. And OHA got back to me and said, that's a great idea. Let's look at it. They said the feds aren't going to go there, but you should talk to John Kitzhaber because he's trying to get a public option going, that proposal for 2023. In the meantime, you might look at the health exchange because the American Rescue Plan Act put a bunch of dollars into the exchange. And so looking into that, both looking at Kitzhaber's proposal for a public option in 2023, which would be sensational. He's talking about the idea of doing the Oregon Health Plan on a sliding scale. So if someone's working for a child care facility, they're making $17 an hour, they make too much for the Oregon Health Plan, but they could buy into the Oregon Health Plan at $25 a month, et cetera, something along those lines. So it's exciting to hear what he's working on and what OHA is trying to support on that. But move me over to the exchange. They led me to that list of local insurance brokers in every region of the state. They get a percentage from the exchange if they sign people up onto the exchange. So one of the things we're talking about is it possible for us to work with providers and have the insurance brokers actually go to the facilities where they're trying to recruit workers and meet with the owners of the facilities so that the owners could actually advertise, here's your rate of pay we can offer, and we will get you low-cost healthcare as part of the package that we can offer you, and have people, the brokers be able to navigate people onto the exchange. And if there's one-time money from the American Rescue Plan coming through early childhood at all, if we could subsidize that effort in any way, if there could be an incentive given for an employee to go through the process to get onto the exchange, and maybe even dollars to help the employee pay for the plan on the exchange for a period of time, we might be able to get more of our people onto healthcare as a benefit. We did a survey here, and only 23% of the people, of the providers that responded, only 23% of the employees here have access to healthcare through their job. So we're looking, is the exchange a possible way that we could actually do this just by using the existing system, using the navigators who already get paid to navigate people onto the exchange, and can we subsidize that process? So that's something we're working at. The same work group working on the workforce issue, and maybe this is a question for David, because I'm sure David's got all these answers because he's been doing this for a while, but the question came up, what would it cost? What does universal pre-K actually mean? What would it cost to have every 3-year-old and 4-year-old at a facility that is run by people who are being paid well and have good benefits, and it's affordable for parents? What does that system look like? How much does that cost? And so, David, if you could answer that in a couple of minutes, that would be great. But the idea behind it is that if we could actually, maybe we can even look at Multnomah County's program that they're starting with their universal pre-K. What are they looking at? What are their costs? Because if we get an idea saying for the state of Oregon, it would cost this much money to have a system where every child had access to either quality childcare or preschool, and the employees were paid a sustainable living wage and benefits. What would that cost? That would give us something that we could actually start to actually work towards, or at least have a discussion of. So that's a request from the work group that we have is please let us know the cost for the state of Oregon to have high quality pre-K. One more thing before I pass it over to David. We have our preschool K-12 summit coming up in August, our second one. I think Sue's going to participate. Colt Gill is going to be the keynote on the first night. Alyssa's going to be the keynote on the second night. We'll send information out. Any of you who want to join that, you're more than welcome. It's 5:30 to 7:30, August 11th and 12th. We're looking forward to bringing people together to do the summit again and move forward on social emotional learning and other things that we're going through. There's a group on the South Coast that's developed a booklet called Help That Helps. It's like a parent information booklet on child development in a trauma-informed lens. So we're hoping to look at that during the summit too as a possible publication that could be used across healthcare, education, human services for parents of all kinds. Here's a little booklet that tells you with some really nice animated graphics. This is what's happening to your 2-year-old. And here's some things that you can actually do that will help in terms of the development of your 2-year-old or your 6-month-old or your 3-year-old. So that's all that stuff that's in the works, and we'll share that out with people as it goes. But David, since I brought up your name, do you have the answer to that question?
I actually do think we have some resources to draw on. So maybe not for the August 11th meeting, but maybe we can have something for you for the fall retreat, if that would work.
That would be fantastic. We just want the total price tag. That's all we want.
That's all they want. No problem, huh, David? And you know, it's interesting, the summit you just described, Peter, I'm excited to listen in. And for me, it's like a listening session because these aren't the parent, they're the providers generally, but they're just putting it right out there, what's working and what's not working and what should be different.
Well, early childhood folks, K-12 folks, and parents. So that's the summit.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Okay, thanks, Peter. Who would like to go next? Kali.
Well, some of what he said made me think of Multnomah County. I think, Multnomah County passed a preschool for all measure. So they are preparing all the rollout there. And the director that was hired ran family childcare for a very long time and also did work in K-12 schools in PPS in some of East County providing childcare services. And so really understands mix, I think, of the K-12 delivery system as well as just family care and what it means. So she's I had a chance to meet with her and she's really trying to be thoughtful and intentional, not just about providing more accessible childcare and doing a rollout responsibly and ensuring that there's quality childcare available, but also professional development and training and looking at, they have dollars, the way it was mapped out, there's a significant chunk of money that is coming from the taxes that support professional development and training. And so looking at that, she's very familiar with CCR&R and is looking at how to strengthen their capacity to do more training. So I think there's some exciting things to come in Multnomah County. It's a huge task and she's staffing up as well. So, but it's exciting. It was fun to hear a little bit about her vision and I knew her already, but just hearing her in this capacity, it's great. I think there's been a health and education committee that I think I reported on last time that involves the head of Care Oregon, head of health chair, the former governor, Kitzhaber, is actually on the committee as well, a number superintendents from Beaverton, and it's a tri-county committee, so Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah County. I have participated in the past as a community-based organization with Kairos, but looking at what does it mean for health and education to combine to support children in a trauma-informed way. And there's been a lot of conversations around what that means, both in early childhood and K-12 and for children with disabilities in the early learning space moving all along. And so there's a white paper that has been developed that will be shared and the Gladstone superintendent has also been involved, Bob Stewart, and he has been really active, probably the most on the K-12 side. And so, we are talking about what would pilots look like? How do you show best practices of specifically early childhood and K-5, sort of that transition and supporting children and families along that way from a health and education standpoint. So, I think they're going to be reaching out. I may be at those meetings, I don't know, to funders as well as to, leaders at the state level, legislators to talk about that. So it's exciting. I think I've been in many of these conversations for a while, but it seems to be coming together for the first time in a few years. So that's exciting. And then I think the last thing is just an acknowledgement of how I've recently talked to, this is, I guess, a little anecdotal, but friends who are physicians. I think what Peg said really struck me. I've talked to a couple of good friends who are physicians who talked about the exact thing that Peg described about just the pressures on the healthcare system right now. One of them is thinking about leaving medicine because they're understaffed and they're not getting the supports. They don't have enough beds. The amounts of a lot of people are coming to emergency and there's just not capacity to serve. And it's heart-wrenching, according to the women that I've spoken with on this. And so I think it's not something I'm usually exposed to, but that's a big issue. It's not a small thing. I don't know how to resolve it, but we're seeing it in the major health systems around our area as well. And I don't know that the masses know really what's happening. And so it's just been something on my mind. And then to hear Peg bring it up, I had a long conversation last weekend about it. So you're just resurrecting. I think my wondering is what is it that, folks like us can do to support our healthcare workers. So anyway, those are my updates.
Great. Thank you, Kali. Wow. Others. Anne.
Angie came off mute before I did, so I'll let her go first.
Sure thing. Sure thing. Okay. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot prepared to share, but just a couple of things. I'll start where Khalid just left off, just because that's kind of the theme right now. So our tribe just today reinstituted the mask requirement for all staff, not just those that are not vaccinated, but now for all staff on the property. And the health clinic is doing voluntary testing for asymptomatic people, just so they can be monitoring and keeping track of those people that may be contracting COVID and not be aware of it. We are doing school full time right now. We're a full year program, so we have kids in school full time. I don't know how long that's going to last, though. We don't have our 2 to 5 year olds in masks. And if we do go back to putting them in masks, we will cut our school day down to half day, because that's a really long time for 2 to 5 year olds to wear a mask. So we're winding down this school year. Our school year ends on August 20th, and we'll have 3 weeks to prepare for the next school year. So trying to jump into that with a lot of unknowns still, as far as what transportation looks like, what food service looks like. You know, again, if we're going to be requiring masks for 2 to 5 year olds, then cutting our school hours again. Along the workforce issues, the tribe just recently announced that they're increasing our minimum wage for non-tipped employees to $16 an hour. I think that goes into effect September 1st, but if not, it does go into effect before before 2022. And that impacts my program a little bit, but my teaching staff was always paid well over that. But for those entry-level staff, the substitutes and the aides, that does give them a little bit of a jump from where they were. Not a lot, but this is, you know, across the whole entire organization. And of course, due to compression, wages will go up for everybody else as well. And I'm sure that this is partly to do with labor shortage, you know, trying to recruit people to come out here to work. But it also reflects the tribe's commitment towards family wages and self-sufficiency for tribal members. Let's see, I wrote a couple of notes here. The last thing I guess I would say is that the tribe several months ago canceled the annual powwow, along with all the other annual gatherings that we have for the summer. They had to make this call really early on before we even knew what the environment was going to look like around COVID. So our membership, our people in the community are really missing that. This has been really hard to take, really. We also have, you know, big kind of carnival nights for families, and so we're trying to do some things creatively where we can have families together without you know, not being indoors for one thing, and then also, you know, trying to be socially distanced outdoors. So it's definitely, I think, having an impact on mental health. Earlier, I think that it was, oh gosh, the child welfare director, I can't remember her name all of a sudden, but she had shared that list of interventions that are approved by the clearinghouse for Native American populations. And it just made me so happy and proud, because things like powwow and sweat lodge and a whole bunch of other culturally relevant ceremonies were on that list. And it made me think about how hard it is right now to not have some of those things. I think that's all I have to share today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Angie, very much. And exciting news about the tribe increasing the wages. And you're right, it'll have a bumping effect too. So good for the tribe. Anne.
Yeah. Hi, everybody again. I think a couple of, first of all, we've just been through, our foundation has just been through a strategic planning process, and we're not completely out the other side, but it's becoming clear that for our next 10 years, we are going to focus on, you know, as you know, we work in rural areas, rural kids having the family, educational, and community supports they need to thrive. And on the educational side, it's really, we're focusing on 2 key transition points, sort of the P3 alignment in rural areas. That is where we've worked a lot, and we're going to continue to do that and increase our work in that area. And then from sort of the post high school transition process, whether it's to career, community college, technical college, or four-year college, and helping to sort of focus on those 2 key transition points. And then, as you know, we have a lot of community building work that we do. And so working with communities to where they want to have a community focus on having their kids and families thrive. So that's a direction that we're going in, which sort of aligns with everything that we do here. And it's not that different from what we've done now, but we're just getting clearer about it. A couple of other things that I just think themes that we're encountering. One of them is the theme that's come up all day today, which is workforce. I mean, workforce in all domains of our work, whether it's child abuse prevention, teaching, family support, everything, health, everything. It's just not there. And, you know, and the thing is that in rural areas, what ends up happening is not only are there workforce shortages, but organizations are competing for the same workforce. And so they're sort of robbing each other for the few qualified staff that are there. And this is just, it's a crisis. It's a crisis. And in all of the areas we're talking about, Peg talked about it in health, we've talked about it in child welfare, we've talked about it, it's just across the board. Now, maybe if we offered better wages, it wouldn't be such a big issue, but in any case, that's one theme. I think the second theme that we're seeing in our rural partners is just exhaustion, absolute exhaustion after COVID and wildfires and everything, and everybody's burnt out. And now all of a sudden there's this flood of public money and people have to get organized to get access to it and figure out how to do it, which is a great problem to have, but it's hard to figure out what to do with that. And so it's really interesting. We as a foundation are seeing fewer grant requests come in because people are too busy getting the big dollars, and figuring out how to do that. So those are my big themes. Just a couple of little high points that I wanted to share. Let's see if what are my little high points? So first of all, I know some of the things that we as a foundation have been working on for a long time, got some important funding in the last legislative session. We've been investing in parenting education for 20 years. 12 years ago, we partnered with the Oregon Community Foundation and others to have a foundation collaborative, and then there's money in the state legislature for parenting education, and there's a possibility for drawing down some federal money for it. So that's really important. Or we have been building up for a long time the sort of state network of child advocacy centers, and again, they were awarded $6 million in this legislative session. It's a big deal that this whole network is now kind of up and running. So that's really important. Another thing, I put it in the chat earlier, we've done a lot of work around home visiting, and not funding home visiting, but trying to help home visiting organizations and systems to coordinate better, because some are oversubscribed, some are undersubscribed, sometimes a family walks in one door, but that's not quite the right home visiting program for them. And so they develop enough relationships that they refer to the right one. And that's really, we've been doing this for 5 years in Southern Oregon and Northern California, and just did an evaluation of it that showed that, there's trusting relationships among the partners, there's governance process, there's inclusive family input into the decision, there's shared intake and referral processes. So this kind of, 5 years of investment in trying to build out a system that is coordinated is starting to pay off a little bit. Katie, we've learned from you and are really working on shared services around childcare. We and the Oregon Community Foundation have a shared services alliance project. Of course, there's your work in Central Oregon. We're working in Southwest Oregon, and there's another pilot in Multnomah County. So there's some really important things happening there in terms of pilots. I think one thing I'll just end on is because I think my colleague Robin Hill Dunbar is listening in on this, but she's just done this great work in Coos and Curry County, where the ESD just knew that they needed more support for social and emotional learning. And so there was a pilot project that trained and repositioned 47 instructional assistants who live and grow up in those areas to become sort of school-based student support specialists. And so now there's currently at least one student specialist in every school on the South Coast, with the goal of creating trauma-informed systems that's evident at every level. So this has been like a big deal. And if my colleague Robin Hill Dunbar is listening on this, because I think she might be, she deserves all the credit for this because she developed this pilot and it's cool now. 47 of them, one in every school.
That is amazing.
There you go.
Wow. Good job. And I love all of these conversations and hearing how it's the, public, private, philanthropic, it's all of these systems kind of coming together and figuring out how to leverage other support. So thank you, Anne. George, anything happening in Eastern Oregon?
There's always a lot of things going on everywhere, it seems like. So for a lot of schools right now, especially in La Grande, but throughout summer school camps, we've received a lot of funds to do club sports and activities and camps and enrichment, and then also learning experiences with students that needed interventions or need extended school years. So we're still in the middle of doing that. We moved away from enrichment to now more recovery, more intervention experiences in our school district. We've had over 55 camps take place, and then that's just, throughout the region or throughout the state, there's a lot of school districts that have been doing that. As COVID guidelines change or as anything happens with CDC, we do get updates from the state, and we now have a resiliency framework that we have to follow, and things that are recommended, we're recommending, and things that are required, we're requiring. And I'd say a lot of school districts are doing the same types of things. For schools, we do have to go through a conversation with our stakeholders, with our health and with our staff and our parents, and go into our pandemic plans. There's a lot of things that are requirements that we have to do before the school year starts. So we're in the middle of organizing and planning those meetings, those conversations, and kind of getting into what we're going to do with face masks, or what we have to do with physical distancing and all the other key practices for safety and operating our schools. I would say schools are also at least getting into their positions on critical race theory and explaining what they do or what they don't do in relation to that. That's a big deal. There's also a lot of shortages going on, especially in positions now too. So we have to discuss how we're going to fill staffing levels or meet needs that we have in our organization. So I'll just say a lot of things. La Grande is also, if you didn't know, we had been remodeling 3 of our modular buildings that we had in our old central site for early learning. So we're almost done with 3 remodels for 3 modulars, so that we have a 0 to 3-year-old classroom in our school district. IMESD has an early intervention childhood center in that location as well, for 2 classrooms. And then we also have a classroom for Eastern Oregon Head Start. So we've updated or enhanced the ability to have more students. Our goal is to see if we can get up to about 130 students to have early learning experiences before they hit kindergarten. So those are some things going on in Eastern Oregon, or at least in La Grande. I lost you, Sue.
So you're on mute.
It sounds like you have a busy summer as usual. Wow. All right, great updates. Wow, we are right about at 5 o'clock. thank you all very much. There has been, as someone pointed out, a lot of information shared today. It may take a little while to let some of it settle in and figure out, you know, for us, what do we do with this? There's so many programs and projects and pilots and money now in the system. So how does the council figure into what really is a pretty new landscape from anything we've seen before? When Alyssa gets back next week, we will definitely have a conversation about, you know, how we want to set up the August meeting. And then also in August, we'll want to get your input for the retreat. Please make sure you have October 26th and 27th on your calendars. Remy may already have put a hold on those dates. What we're hoping to do, but who knows in this changing COVID world, we're hoping that we can meet in person in Salem the way we've done in the past, pre-COVID, on Tuesday the 26th, and then the half a day on Wednesday the 27th. So we'll see if COVID lets us do that. If not, we will do the virtual meeting once again, as we did last year. But in August, we're going to hear from a variety of staff members at the ELD about the legislation that was passed this session. And it's a long list, as you know, if you had time to read the handout that Remy sent this morning. So, and many of them require rulemaking on our part. So we're going to have a lot of work to do. Staff obviously has to set the rules up for us, but we're going to have a lot of discussions and conversations and decisions to make. So the other thing that I think we need to discuss, or well, we will need to discuss, is a calendar of our meetings for 2022. And I've talked with a couple of you about switching, instead of these quarterly meetings with 2 meetings 2 weeks apart, switching to an every other month schedule. So they're on our calendars. Staff is finding it's really hard to prep for the second meeting of these quarterly meetings with only 2 weeks in between. So we'll want to talk about that and getting a tentative schedule out of what would every other month look like. The State Board of Education meets every month. So we'll see as we become DELC and our own agency, who knows what that will involve as far as our responsibilities. And really, I encourage you, I know House Bill 3073 is 60 pages long, but it's really quite interesting and a little overwhelming to read how many times in that bill it talks about the council. So we've been given some responsibilities that I think will be exciting to fulfill. Any final words from anybody before we close this out and see you in 2 weeks? Peter.
So I just tossed in the chat the link to John Kitzhaber's kind of frame. It's an interesting frame if you had a chance to take a look at it. It's a white paper really on the work that we're doing. He puts it together in a really nice way. So just to note.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. And Remy, will you send out whatever links are in the chat box for all of us as follow-up? Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay. Thank you all very much. Have a great 2 weeks, and I'll see you on August 11th.